Radio Free Mormon here, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Episode 459 tonight. Don't forget about Moroni. Good evening, everybody. Radio Free Mormon here. We're going to be doing a deep dive into the Moroni accounts. Yes, there's more than one account of Moroni, just like there's more than one account of the first vision. I have for a long time now been quite familiar with the accounts of the first vision and how they relate to each other and the problems that arise when you compare them. I have not, however, expended the same energy familiarizing myself with the accounts of Moroni showing up to Joseph Smith, which I have been doing this past week. We're going to be going into those in some depth, and perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, the Moroni accounts end up with, I think, as many problems as the first vision account. To help me go through this, I've got some special guests on the show. We've got Kolby, some Rando from down the street, is joining us. Hello, Kolby.
Good morning, RFM. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And also joining us is famous actor Randall Bell.
And good morning and good afternoon, whatever it is, to both of you.
I know I started with good evening because that's when it will premiere tonight on Saturday, May 30th, 2026. But we're recording this early this morning. And thank you, both of you, for joining me in this adventure. I think this is really exciting. This is an area, I always get excited when there's an area that I'm so busy, I'm doing all this other stuff, but there's an area out there, it's kind of fuzzy to me. I don't really have my hands around it. And that's the Moroni accounts, and that's what we're going to do today. I don't know how you have felt about it. Hey, and there's Bill Real!
Hola, sorry I'm late. I lost track of time, was putting a bed together.
Were you late? I thought we started early.
No, yeah, I wish. Morning Standard Time, MST.
Okay, well, fantastic. I'm so glad to have you here. Bill Real will be joining us as well. And Bill, I just want to get some thoughts from each of you. We're going to make this funny. We're going to make this exciting because it's history, and otherwise, you know what happens.
Yeah.
Bad things. So, but it's about Moroni and the different accounts of Moroni, which I had never really gone through with any degree of detail. You know, I've heard things along the way, but it never really stuck because I never really had the different accounts to contextualize them in, which is what I need to have things stick in my mind. How have you been about that, Bill?
How have I been about
the Moroni accounts?
Yeah. So, okay. So let's try to address that. There are so many things that have to do with Moroni that we in Mormonism don't deal with. Now you're talking about the Moroni accounts in regards to the first vision and other stuff, but I think of things like Moroni saying that the plates were gold, and we have a workaround for that. I think about things like Moroni tells David Whitmer that I'm on my way to Cumorah, and here I am walking there, and we've got a workaround for that.
You know, Fats Domino did a song about that. It's called "I'm Walking to Cumorah."
Yeah, well, Mormonism has a lot of issues with Moroni that we don't even acknowledge or are sitting right there in front of us, and I think Moroni alone has multiple facets that you could deconstruct Mormonism and go like, oh, that's just absurd. Cumorah has to be in New York. The plates have to be gold. There are things, again, we'll get into today that he says about in regards to that 1832 first vision account. And anyway, Moroni is a lot of fun to dive into. We've done a biography on him as well. And so
it's like Jesus said in Matthew, with apologists, all things are possible.
They are.
But this is specifically Moroni showing up to Joseph Smith. And, you know, the whole plate transaction, which took a number of years, but we're talking about those specifically this evening. And you're right, there's a lot of lore about Moroni, but we're going to try and drill down into what is the church doctrine, the church history, and how it compares with the documents themselves. Randy and Kolby, what's your relationship with Moroni like?
Go ahead, Kolby.
Well, I would say I'm actually excited to dive into this, RFM, because like I was telling you on the phone last night, I've never done really a deep dive on Moroni accounts. I would point people to, I was just going to grab it off my shelf here. I would say the area I'm most familiar with is Mark Elwood did the Glass Looker series. He's got 2 volumes out that tell some of those early church history accounts that really focus on the folk magic treasure digging side of things. And he has the account in here of Moroni appearing like a toad and, smacking Joseph Smith upside the head a few times. So I'm familiar with those accounts. And then obviously the traditional, the traditional conventional account that people understand about Moroni. But beyond that, I'm just excited
glad we're
to
having
dive
this
in.
conversation because, I am now more familiar with the esoteric folk magic aspects of Moroni than the accounts on which the church history version of Moroni is based. Randall, your thoughts?
Well, in honor of today's episode, I got out my old flip chart from my England mission. This is what we carried around with us, very low tech. And there's Moroni himself. I've showed this picture to hundreds of investigators. And what's stunning to me, and frankly, the genius in the research you're doing, is that it's not just the first vision. It's Peter, James, and John. That falls apart. And now Moroni, every single one of these so-called angelic visits or visits from deity crumbles upon any kind of level of critical thinking or analysis. So, frankly, I'm here to hopefully contribute a little bit, but I'm also excited about getting up to speed on this stuff.
Well, that's how I feel too, and I'm real excited about it. Here's the thumbnail. Don't you forget about Moroni is the name of tonight's show. And it's got all our pictures, plus Judd Nelson, plus a little known guy named Moroni. Here we go. All right. There's a number of slides, but 5 primary accounts. There's 4 primary accounts of the first vision. Well, as it turns out, there's 5 primary accounts of the angel's visit. I'm going to say the angel, okay, because spoiler alert, Moroni doesn't get his name until 1835. He's supposed to show up in 1823. That's the regular story, but he doesn't get assigned a name, at least in no document that we're aware of, until, what is that? That's 7 plus 5 is 12 years later is when he first gets a name. So that's why I say the angel's visit. 1832, the first source is the 1832 letter book A, right? It's immediately after the 1832 first vision account where just Jesus shows up. So that's
that account. Would that account be in Joseph Smith's handwriting? Just asking for a friend.
It's either his or Frederick G. Williams because he took over at some point. So it's one or the other. Yes.
Okay.
Look closely.
I just want to know. I want to know how closely I have to look. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. The second source is 1835. It's Oliver Cowdery's letter 4 in the Messenger and Advocate. We'll go into that a bit more as to what that means. That's a very, very important historical source in church history, is a series of letters that Oliver Cowdery wrote. Number 3 is also in 1835. This is Joseph Smith's journal account. You may know it as the Robert Matthews account. And that's when he's having the conversation with the other guy who claims to be a prophet, right? Robert Matthews, I believe, is his real name. And he tells him that first vision account, the 1835 account of the first vision, and also an account about the angel. So that's that account. Number 4 is the one that we should all be familiar with, I think, by this time. That's the official account, the 1838, some people say, or 39, History of the Church. In other words, the Pearl of Great Price, PGP version. And finally, the Wentworth Letter in 1842. So we're going to go over all of those tonight, see how they compare with each other, and any thoughts that it might jog loose in our minds. So here's the first one, History, circa summer 1832. This is the one that is probably in Joseph Smith's own handwriting. And this is where it starts. And hey, Bill, if I could have you read, this is 2 pages, 2 slides, I should say. And can you start right there where it starts with the yellow I fell into? Because you'll see what leads into it is his reaction of great joy after having experienced the first vision as he records it in 1832. But then he says, but after many days, I fell into transgressions. Can you take it from there, Bill?
Yeah, so I'll start with, I fell into transgressions and sinned in many things, which brought a wound upon my soul. there were many things which transpired that cannot be written. And my father's family have suffered many persecutions and afflictions. And it came to pass, interesting, it came to pass when I was 17 years of age. I
Hang on
called.
a second. Why is it interesting this it came to pass that he uses to talk about his own history?
Well, and it came to pass is a phrase in the Book of Mormon hundreds, if not 1,000 times. And, you know, again, apologetics, when they deal with that, go like, well, it's a transitional. And if we go back to Hebrew and there's this transitional way of moving from one part of a story to another. And I just want to note that Joseph Smith seems deeply familiar with, and it came to pass, without needing a Book of Mormon story to validate that.
Well, it's 1832, and he'd already translated the Book of Mormon. He probably picked up the habit from there.
Yeah. Or he already had a habit and the Book of Mormon picked that up from him. Yes.
It's a nice expression. We all have expressions, don't we? Where we're actually not saying anything. It's a space filler. Some people just go, but other people will just say these trite phrases that are used to fill the time while they're thinking about the next thing they're going to say. And I think that, and it came to pass, can be something like that.
Yeah, and I think when they did a stylometry study on this 1832 account, they found that this had 3 different authors as well. So it might be an ancient text too.
Are you kidding me?
That was supposed to be a joke, but none of you guys.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So you were kidding me, in other words.
I was kidding you. All right.
Okay, because I thought maybe that had happened. I just hadn't heard.
No. And it came to pass when I was 17 years of age, I called again upon the Lord, and he showed unto me a heavenly vision. For behold, an angel of the Lord came and stood before me. And it was by night, and he called me by name and said, the Lord had forgiven my sins. He revealed unto me that in the town of Manchester, Ontario County, New York, there was plates of gold. There it is.
Plates of gold, not golden plates.
No, plates of gold. And it's, I'll just stop here and say, it's because of all the accounts when taken as a whole that we see that Joseph Smith is telling us he has to fight against this urge to be greedy and to use the plates for financial gain. And here you have the reason why Moroni is telling him these are plates of gold, upon which there was engravings, which was engraven by Moroni and his fathers, the servants of the living God.
Can I stop right there for just a second? The name appears with a different spelling. It's Maroni, Moroni, but that's the name. But notice that it is given in third person and only as a person who, in company with his fathers, are the ones who engraved on the plates. That's the thing that's interesting to me about this. It's not, he said, my name is Moroni, which is what it will end up becoming in 1838, by the way, in our official account. He doesn't say at the very beginning, my name is Moroni. I mean, how else is Joseph Smith going to know who the guy is, right? So, but here Moroni is referred to, but not in context of it being used as the name of the angel.
In fact, I'd suggest it's very odd to have described that person as an angel of the Lord and then later use the name Moroni. As you know, RFM, there's this canon of statutory construction in the legal field that difference is presumed to mean something, that if you use one term and then you use a separate term, that would be an implicit recognition that the author was not intending for that angel of the Lord to be Moroni, because if it was, they would have just used the name Moroni rather than a separate term for the same being. So if an apologist were to argue, well, it's not inconsistent. It's like, well, not in the like technical sense, but if we're thinking critically, there's no reason to use 2 different terms for the same being.
This is one of the unusual aspects of the 1832 version. How does it strike you, Randy?
It strikes me as he's retrofitting a story ultimately, but so far so good. That's my only thought so far.
Okay, thank you so much.
Is it strange that he misspells the name of Moroni when we're here? This is 1832, correct? It's in his own handwriting. When
this section is actually Frederick G. Williams' handwriting. I checked, RFM, you're right.
Okay. Well, that would be the difference then. It's because to me, as the Book of Mormon translation's happening, Joseph is so apt to want the words spelled back to him and to correct them before he goes on. And so it seems by 1832, having used Moroni numerous times as a name for two different characters, right, in the Book of Mormon, that you would get it right.
I think the thing I'm struck by too, just reading it all together, like the syntax, the grammatical construction that Joseph uses, it sounds very similar. We joked about the "and it came to pass," but setting aside just that one, it sounds very much like the Book of Mormon's kind of flow, right? The Lord had forgiven me of my sins, and he had revealed unto me that there was plates of gold upon which the engravings, which was engraven by Moroni. It sounds very much like the Book of Mormon's cadence. And this is a point that I've made when you look at Joseph Smith's earliest letters in 1830. It's this idea that apologists have that Joseph Smith could not write a well-worded letter is nonsensical when you actually look at his earliest letters. And I think we're seeing very clear, like the cadence of the Book of Mormon in this account, because even if it was recorded by Frederick G. Williams, there's no doubt but that was at the dictation of Joseph Smith.
Yeah. And one more thing, I think, in trials, we always have a timeline so we can show what happened when, as far as the whole case rolling out and the fact patterns and where they fit. And the important thing with the timeline here, and I'm kind of stating the obvious, I think, but it bears reminding that the church was formed in 1830. So think about it. In 1830, when Joseph Smith started the book, the church, there was no first vision account, none. It didn't exist in 1830 when he started the church. This whole Moroni thing came in 1832, the very first mention of it, really later than that. So that didn't exist. And Peter, James, and John, that whole discussion hadn't happened. So in 1830, which is a critical benchmark date, there were none of the things that the apologists brag about, what makes the church unique with its authority and everything else.
I think that the story about an angel appearing to Joseph Smith and the gold plates is one of the oldest stories in Mormonism. It goes back, I'm pretty sure, into the 1820s, and it has to be sort of a segue from the treasure guardian spirit to the angel that happens over that decade, I think. And then it shows up, but he doesn't have a name. It is just an angel. And indeed, how would you know an angel's name or any divine being that appears to you unless they told you?
Yeah, thanks for that's a good clarifying point.
The other thing about this, I'm just going to state this, okay? We're going to get through all of these slides, believe me. It may be midnight before we do. But I do also note that it is very hard. You remember where it was hard for me to get you a place to start, Bill, because it's in the middle of a sentence?
Yes.
Everything in this is in the middle of a sentence because it's like one sentence. There's really no punctuation, and it is dictated in such a way that punctuation is almost obliterated. You're going to have to do some real work to punctuate this thing. I only bring that up because my understanding is, and I have seen the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon, not the original, but photographs of it. And that's the same way that the Book of Mormon was dictated. Sometimes as an apologist, I used to use this as some kind of a proof or evidence that this means that Joseph Smith really was dictating a record. He's really translating the Book of Mormon. And he's not mentioning the punctuation because you wouldn't do that as you're translating. Well, you might, but he didn't. He never used punctuation when he was dictating, is all I'm saying. Okay, so do you remember where you were, Bill?
I do. So it says here, there was plates of gold upon which there was engravings, which was engraven by Moroni and his fathers, the servants of the living God in ancient days, and deposited by the commandments of God and kept by the power thereof. And that I should go and get them. And he revealed unto me many things concerning the inhabitants of the earth, which since have been revealed in commandments and revelations. And it was the 22nd day of September, AD 1822.
Yeah, he seems to have had trouble with that date. And once again, I don't really have too much trouble with people forgetting years or dates, maybe because I do it so often. And he's 1 year off of the regular, or what will become the official account. So AD 1822, Any thoughts that anybody else has about the wrong year? When I say wrong year, it's a strange thing to say it's a wrong year when we're talking about an incident that probably never happened.
Yeah. So you have him getting his first seer stone in 1819. You have him getting his second seer stone in 1822. And again, in those early accounts of Moroni, as well as, again, that early account from Martin Harris, we have Joseph Smith doing treasure digging activity, and that's how he locates the plates, is using the seer stone. So I will at least throw out this possibility that I think can be argued just as well as any faithful narrative, which is that Joseph Smith had these secular spiritual experiences. They're away from God and Jesus and religious narrative. And he had these other experiences that he makes claims of in 1819 and 1822 that maybe he is repurposing, giving a spiritual language to, so that in 1820, when he has his first vision, there might be connections there to things he's claiming in 1819 that happened. And when he makes claims about 1823 in Moroni, maybe that's much more connected to 1822 and his use of the seer stone that he gets from the Willard Chase well, because we don't have these accounts. We have the early associates of Smith telling us very different stories about throat slit Spaniards and bloody clothed guardian spirits over the treasure. And he's already been telling all these stories to people. And now we get into this later moment, and he has to sort of deal with these other stories that are in his head and what kind of story he's trying to create now. And he might be attaching similar years to things so as to keep some sense of semblance in his own mind about how to connect these dots.
Okay. Thank you. So
Yeah.
there's 1822. I'm sorry, Randy.
I was just going to quickly say, I think it bears repeating one of the more standout comments you made, I think years ago, RFM, and that is a seer stone, to keep that in perspective, is a poor man's crystal ball. If you can't afford a crystal ball for this kind of psychic kind of, treasure digging stuff, you get a rock and call it a seer stone.
Yes. And you get a stick and call it a rod.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. I mean, you could find it anywhere, in other words. Thank you. So 1822, and then can you continue with that, Bill? I'm going to, I think, go to Kolby for the next slide, just to give you a little bit of warning there.
No worries. And thus he appeared unto me 3 times in one night, and once on the next day. And I immediately went to the place and found where the plates was deposited as the angel of the Lord had commanded me, and straightway made 3 attempts to get them. And then, being exceedingly frightened, I supposed it had been a dream of vision. Again, I'll just note here, supposed is more like maybe, like I don't know. And yet there comes later on a little more certainty about what the experience is. So I do find that interesting as well.
If I can comment on that phrase too, I think it's in First Nephi when Lehi sees a vision. He had the vision of the tree of life, his version in First Nephi 8. It is in First Nephi 8. He comes out and says, I have dreamed a dream, or I have seen a vision. It's interesting to me to see this link between dream and vision in Joseph Smith's own words. I just am, as you're reading this, I just am really struck by how much the grammar and the word choice aligns with the Book of Mormon. In fact, I took this entire passage, ran it by my little AI assistant that has access to the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, and it's saying that it's very likely that these came from the same author based on the grammatical construction, the non-standard use of the grammar. Anyways, that's an interesting aside. But
no, wait. Okay, that's not an interesting aside. That's a big headline. So what we're doing is we're looking at the 1832 account, Joseph Smith's 1832 account of the history of the church that he started and was never finished. And he picked it up again, years later. And that's how we got the official history of the church. But you're saying that you took Joseph Smith's own writing and his own dictation, both of which are contained in this document from 1832, and you ran it through your AI Argus. And it told you what?
Yeah, it's specifically focusing on the use of the archaic verbs. So Joseph Smith is consistently using doeth, beareth, maketh, decreeth, seeketh. And then in the Book of Mormon, that's replete throughout the Book of Mormon. And then it's looking at the non-standard use of the grammar. So the the tense agreement, the subject verb disagreement, those are very very strong markers of how Joseph Smith thought, right? Because whether it's dictation or writing, what you're really capturing is the way that person thinks. And so the fact that we've got non-standard grammar use that agrees with the Book of Mormon, the basic conclusion that I got, and I'd be happy to share the full analysis with you after RFM, says the grammar and structure of this 1832 history are highly consistent with Joseph Smith being capable of producing the kind of language that is found in the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon.
Wow. And once again, underscoring that's the 1830 edition. In other words, what was closest in published form to the original and Joseph Smith's language and word choices. That may be its own episode. This is huge. Okay. Yeah. And we're just finding this out right now. And you're finding it out right now. I don't think this has been said before. I haven't heard it said before. Has anybody heard it said before, Bill? Randy?
But you made...
I was just going to say that's a big find.
Yeah, I think so.
You made comments in our episode last Wednesday about how much Joseph Smith is using scriptural references in the stories he tells. You know, he's borrowing from so many places in the Old and New Testament as he forms this narrative. And so I think that's another part of this as well, that when you take Joseph Smith using the same kind of language that the Book of Mormon uses, and he shows an aptitude of knowing the scriptures well enough to pull here, pull there, pull from somewhere else and put it together. I think those two things combined are telling us something. And I think there is some, you know, again, great to Kolby for the research, but I think there's work to be done there to sort of flesh that out and show that Joseph Smith may be showing a lot more of himself in this work than he would like to.
And that's exactly what those 1830 letters show too, Bill, is that Joseph Smith had this ability, and that's one of the, you know, I just gave you guys the summary, but that's one of the 5 factors that Argos is saying that we see the same tendency towards scriptural collage. The history account blends biblical allusions with Joseph Smith's first person experience, and then it has a number of phrases that God was the same yesterday, today, and forever, that God is no respecter of persons, that the fool hath said in his heart there is no God, that those worship him in spirit and in truth. They draw near to me with their lips while their hearts are from me. None doeth good, no, not one. So just to back up what you're saying, that's exactly one of the things that it's looking at, is the way that Joseph Smith uses scriptural language, merges it into his own new narrative to form this kind of pastiche of scriptural sounding narrative. And that's I do truly believe that was Joseph Smith's like unique superpower, if you want to say, that he was so steeped in the Bible, notwithstanding what, you know, his mother said, that he was so steeped in the Bible that this is just the way he thought, that he thought in that pattern.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree very much with you. And it's going to turn out that Moroni uses the same kind of pattern of scriptural collage. It's a total coincidence, I'm sure.
Funny that, isn't it?
Hey, Bill, can you continue from 1822 where you left off in this 1832 account by Joseph Smith?
I will. I will note one other thing, which is I'll give Joseph some credit. He at least is consistent in the story that Moroni appeared 3 times in the night and once the next day. And I think we at least ought to acknowledge that part of the story is consistent and in some ways gives some credibility, again, that the faithful could use as a evidence that the story did have some consistency to it. Okay.
Is there I'm so sorry. Is there a folk magic significance to the 3 times?
Yes, very much so, as well as the date.
Yeah.
All right. So let's see here. I suppose it had been a dream. Am I in the right spot here?
Can you go to the 1822, the one that's underlined in yellow?
Oh, okay.
Oh no, you had gotten to dream of vision.
Dream of vision. Yeah.
Okay.
But I can. Dream of vision. But when I considered, I knew that it was not. Therefore, I cried unto the Lord in an agony of my soul. Why can I not obtain them? Behold, the angel appeared unto me again and said unto me, you have not kept the commandments of the Lord, which I gave unto you. Therefore, you cannot now obtain them, for the time is not yet fulfilled.
All right. So apparently he went there to the hill by himself and tried to find the plates, and he couldn't obtain them. in the way that he thought it must be a vision or a dream, which makes me think he hadn't even seen the plates yet. He's just looking around trying to find them, but he can't. Because if he actually saw the plates, he would know it wasn't a dream or a vision, right?
Right.
But anyway, whatever he's trying to say, it's a little bit not clear. But let's go to the next slide and let Kolby take over the reading.
The angel again appeared unto me, the angel appeared unto me again and said unto me, you have not kept the commandments of the Lord, which I gave unto you. Therefore, you cannot now obtain them, for the time is not yet fulfilled. Therefore, thou wast left unto temptation, that thou mightest be made acquainted with the power of the adversary. Therefore, repent and call on the Lord, thou shalt be forgiven. And in his own due time thou shalt obtain them. For now I had been tempted of the adversary. I think it's supposed to be adversary. Yeah. And sought the plates. Yes. Advisory. Yeah. The plates to, So for now I had been tempted of the adversary and sought the plates to obtain riches and kept not the commandment that I should have an eye single to the glory of God. Therefore, I was chastened and sought diligently to obtain the plates and obtained them not until I was 21 years of age. And in this year, I was married to Emma Hale, daughter of Isaac Hale, who lived in Harmony, Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania on the 18th of January, 1827. It's just one gigantic run-on sentence. It's crazy. On the 22nd day of September of this same year, I obtained the plates.
And that's where I ended it, even though the sentence doesn't end there. Okay. And the sentence will not end until the end of the document itself, I think. All right. So that is the 1832 account that Joseph Smith gives of the visit of the angel. And here are a few notes that I made, and then I'll let you add anything that you want. In the 1832 account, number one, the angel's name is not given. 2, Moroni, Maroni, is mentioned in the third person. I said it's similar to the Son of Man in the New Testament. I don't want to get into that. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. It's basically the Son of Man. The prophecy from Daniel gets cited initially as if it's a third person. At least scholars agree to this. Jesus talks about the Son of Man coming as if it's not he. And then later on, as Gospels progress, it becomes more and more associated with Jesus, and he's the Son of Man who's going to come in the clouds. And 3, nothing about all the scriptural passages the angel recited to Joseph Smith, right? I mean, that's what he's famous for, at least to me, in the 1838 account. It's like Moroni shows up and he can't quote enough scripture to Joseph Smith.
I'll just comment on the fact, because I noticed that while we were going through. Yes, he had the 3 times, but no, he didn't have the detail of what those 3 times involved. But the thing I'm struck by is even like the 1838 account, when we get Joseph Smith talking about those scriptural passages and Joseph Smith noting like the slight deviations from those scriptural passages, it's kind of absurd to think that Joseph Smith could remember that level of specificity and not remember the year that these events supposedly happened.
Well, maybe you're right. I don't know. The Holy Ghost, it is said, brings all things to one's remembrance except for years.
Except for dates. He's bad with dates.
He is bad at dates. I'm bad at faces. It's okay. Holy Ghost is bad at dates. Any comments before we go to the next one, which is going to be lengthy, and I'm going to read because I'm going to read it at a healthy clip. No? Okay. So the next one is going to be the 1835 account by Oliver Cowdery. Once again, this is the second main primary source. Now, this is a series of letters that Oliver Cowdery wrote, and I believe he's down in Missouri because Joseph Smith sent him down there for some reason. And he's writing these letters to William W. Phelps. And what he's doing in these letters is he is specifically writing them, I believe, to be published, which they were in the Messenger and Advocate. And they're supposed to talk about the early history of the church. Can you imagine? We've got a series of letters from Oliver Cowdery, 1835, really early, talking about the history of the church that he was not involved in, but he's the second elder in the church. It's 1835. He's known Joseph Smith for 6 years now. And he actually worked with Joseph Smith in coming up with this history. So this is something that is very closely aligned with Joseph Smith, such that it's hard to think that Joseph Smith would not have agreed with everything that he wrote. At least he never said that Oliver got something wrong. So here's Oliver Cowdery's letters to W. W. Phelps. The first published consecutive account of the origin of the church began in the October 1834 issue of the Messenger and Advocate. It consists of 8 letters written by Oliver Cowdery to W. W. Phelps. This account is very important, as Oliver Cowdery claims in a letter published In the October 1834 issue, but dated September 17, 1834, sorry, the main point is that Joseph Smith assisted him in the writing of the letters. So Oliver Cowdery claims Joseph Smith assisted him. So this is pretty close to Joseph Smith. All 8 letters are here presented in their entirety. We're going to go to letter 4. That's the one that has to do with Moroni. And you can see, by the way, Randy, can you read what each of the letters has to do with?
Sure. Letter 1, Oliver meets Joseph. John the Baptist restores the Aaronic priesthood. Letter 2, men praise those in the past while rejecting prophets in their midst. Letter 3, religious excitement in Joseph's youth. Letter 4, Moroni's visit of September 21st, 1823. Letter 5, the scattering and gathering of Israel. Letter 6, war on the scattering and gathering of Israel. Letter 7, going to Cumorah, a description of Cumorah. And finally, letter 8, arrival at Cumorah, failure to get the plates, description of the box.
So all these things that happened before Oliver Cowdery came on the scene, except for the very first one where Oliver does meet Joseph and John the Baptist. So that Oliver Cowdery was present. So my question is, which letter of Oliver Cowdery covers the first vision? You know what the answer to that is? None of them. Yeah, none of them. He is writing a series of letters covering the history of the church. And he talks about all these things, John the Baptist and Moroni, but he doesn't talk at all about the first vision, which is a strange omission.
Or Peter, James, and John, it seems.
Right. That's true too. I believe that is correct. That
is correct. I just searched.
Thank you. So here it is. This is how it looks in the Messenger and Advocate. It's letter 4. It's down there. It's circled in yellow. I'm not going to read that, but I am going to read this, which is a transcript of the same, which is, I think, from Scripture Central. Okay, the religious excitement. Now, here's the first thing you need to know, is that in the letter immediately preceding this, Oliver Cowdery ends by describing the religious excitement that was going on in Joseph Smith's neighborhood, which to those of us who have been raised with the 1838 official account, we know that signals that we should be expecting the first vision story to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's no religious excitement associated with Moroni. That's 3 years later. All the religious excitement in the 1830 account presages the first vision. So he begins here, and I'm not reading all of letter 7, by the way, not 7, letter 4. I'm not reading all of letter 4, but here at the beginning of letter 4, Oliver references back to what he had talked about at the end of his last letter about this religious excitement. You will recollect that I mentioned the time of a religious excitement in Palmyra and vicinity to have been in the 15th year of our brother Joseph Smith Jr.'s age. That was an error in the type. It should have been in the 17th. You will please remember this correction, as it will be necessary for the full understanding of what will follow in time. This would bring the date down to the year 1823. So for whatever reason, Oliver Cowdery is now going to conflate the religious excitement as the thing that prompted Joseph Smith not to obtain the first vision, which he mentions not, but Moroni's the angel's visit.
That's really, really interesting to me when we understand how religious narratives evolve and change over time and kind of shift over time, right? That doesn't necessarily mean there's anything untoward knowingly going on here, just recognizing that this is kind of how we understand today that memory works and how reinventing the origins of this movement would work.
Yeah, and it appears that Oliver Cowdery is not aware of this first vision account, the 1832 account. If he is, he doesn't think it's important enough to mention. I mean, how do you say seeing Jesus is not important enough to mention? I don't know.
Well, and not just seeing Jesus, but like literally Joseph Smith says, I knew it. I knew that God knew it, and I could not deny it. So the idea that he's going to say that in 1838, but it's not going to be mentioned here is a little ridiculous, I would say.
So once again, we've got this interest, and Oliver Cowdery is not the only person who's going to do this. There seems to be a conflation between the first vision account and the accounts of Moroni's in a number of early sources. And here's my hypothesis, okay? I won't even say it's a theory. My hypothesis is that this originally started as one story. And then over time, it became bifurcated into two stories. I think it originally began with the story of the angel or the messenger or the spirit or whatever you want to call it, the being that ended up becoming Moroni or given the name Moroni. It started with an angel, and then later on that became bifurcated into another story about Jesus, which then assumed its own trajectory and became about Jesus and Heavenly Father appearing to Joseph Smith. And that is what I think may account for this strange, it's like mixing and it's like we're animals. You got the elements of the first vision, as we understand it, showing up in Moroni's account. And I think that maybe what happened is they were originally there, and then they got split up and applied to the first vision. Okay, he goes on. This would bring the date down to the year of 1823. Once again, Oliver writing. I do not deem it to be necessary to write further on the subject of this excitement. And he does describe it more in very familiar terms at the end of the prior letter, letter 3. It is doubted by many whether any real or essential good ever resulted from such excitements, while others advocate their propriety with warmth. You can tell he's quite flowery in his language. This is one of the reasons I want to try and read through this at a good clip. Now, Joseph Smith was not sure at the time whether God existed, apparently, which is a strange thing, okay? You see, I underlined that in yellow. Oliver Cowdery is writing about Joseph Smith's visit from the angel. And in the context of it, Joseph Smith is not sure if a supreme being existed. Well, didn't he just see Jesus or God in Jesus 3 years earlier? Apparently not. But if others were not benefited, our brother, Joseph, was urged forward and strengthened in the determination to know for himself of the certainty and reality of pure and holy religion. And it is only necessary for me to say that while this excitement continued, he continued to call upon the Lord in secret for a full manifestation of divine approbation, and for to him the all-important information if a supreme being did exist, to have an assurance that he was accepted of him. This most assuredly was correct. It was right. The Lord has said long since, and his word remains steadfast, that for him who knocks it shall be open, and whosoever will may come and partake of the waters of life freely. Anybody want to mention anything about this slide?
I would just say that even the back half of that sentence that you drew attention to, RFM, when it says to have an assurance that he was accepted of him. Well, in both the 1832 and 1838 accounts, that question is settled. In the 1832 account, right, Joseph goes to receive largely forgiveness of his sins. And so it's not just I guess what I'm saying is I'm just drawing attention to the fact that it's not just Joseph questioning whether a supreme being does exist. This is a direct contradiction to the 1832 account in the sense that Joseph Smith knew at the end of that account that he was forgiven of his sins and thus accepted of God. And this is saying that he's continuing to search for that years after that would have taken place.
I think that he tries to account for that by saying that he fell into all kinds of transgressions.
True.
In the intervening 3 years, I'm guessing. But this is part of the similarity between the two accounts and where they seem to blur and seem to be very similar. Randy or Bill, did you have anything you wanted to say about this before we went to the next slide?
The religious excitement from the previous slide, it just strikes me that, again, there's been this large debate in criticism and apologetics about when there was an actual religious excitement in Palmyra. And I think the strongest evidence points to it not being at the time that Joseph says it's there. On the other hand, I'll call it religious excitement, but the treasure digging it really is the thing that is occupying the entire neighborhood, to the point where Abner Cole and Samuel Lawrence and Sally Chase and Luman Walters and Hiram Smith and Alvin Smith and Joseph Smith, like the whole community is doing this treasure digging thing, and they're all excited about that and digging all over the countryside. I'm at least wondering in my head if, when Joseph is again repurposing the narratives of his life into a religious story, that the religious excitement that he's really trying to reframe as the religious excitement that doesn't exist is the treasure digging culture.
Right. And at least in the 1823 date, this would bring the date down to the year 1823 is the part I'm focusing on. I believe that does end up landing it into what really was the religious excitement time period that was going on in Palmyra.
Hmm.
And so that would end up being accurate or at least historically verifiable. Whereas it seems that when Joseph Smith now perhaps creates another vision that predates the Moroni or the angel visitation by 3 years and then takes the religious excitement from Moroni in 1823 here and puts it into that context, then all of a sudden it's anachronistic because there was apparently not that religious excitement going on 3 years before 1823 when Joseph Smith says there were and that's why he ends up having the first vision.
Is one of the reasons that Joseph Smith likely backed up from 1823 to 1820, isn't it likely that he's doing that to build some bifurcation between like his calling as a prophet in 1820 through the first vision and his later treasure digs? So to the line that you referenced, Arfam, about him falling into all types of foibles or whatever, do you think that's what he's doing? Is he needs to back it up because he's trying to separate it as much as he can from his history as a treasure digger?
I am not sure. He may be. Not for the timing beforehand, but
Mhm.
my understanding is that the reason he may have come up with the idea is to establish his authority as a prophet, because people were getting ideas in the church that maybe they had as much authority as he did, and that's because of the congregational initial aspect of the church. And he's
Mhm.
trying to set himself apart now as the prophet, much as he did with Hiram Page and the whole Peepstone incident. That I'm the only one who receives revelation through a stone in this church.
Yeah. And there's a theme where he's actively trying to retrofit his whole, frankly, confusing story into a more streamlined narrative, a process that seems to be going on for years to get his facts straight. If you can go back to the slide about the doubting the deity. I mean, this again, you start a church in 1830 called the Church of Christ, which is a name taken from Dartmouth, by the way, using the exact same name of the church where Hiram attended zillions of lectures. And you start a church in 1830, and after that, you're wondering if a supreme exists, a supreme being exists. It's just a mess, and they're trying to clean it up.
Okay, thank you. Continuing now, Oliver Cowdery. And once again, there's not a lot necessarily that's comment worthy in it. Please comment if you think there is. I'm going to try and read through it at a good clip so that for the sake of completion, right? So that you'll know that we've gone over the documents and you'll be familiar with them. On the evening of the 21st of September, 1823, previous to retiring to rest, our brother's mind, that's Joseph, was unusually wrought up on the subject which had so long agitated his mind. His heart was drawn out in fervent prayer, and his whole soul was so lost to everything of a temporal nature that earth to him had lost its claims, and all he desired was to be prepared in heart to commune with some kind of messenger who could communicate to him the desired information of his acceptance with God. At length the family retired, and he, as usual, bent his way, though in silence, where others might have rested their weary frames, locked fast in sleep's embrace, where he's quoting something that I'm not familiar with. But repose had fled, and accustomed slumber had spread her refreshing hand over others beside him. He continued still to pray. His heart, though once hard and obdurate, was softened, and that mind which had often flitted like the wild bird of passage, another quote, had settled upon a determined basis not to be decoyed or driven from its purpose. I almost expected him to quote, sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. In this situation, hours passed unnumbered. How many or how few, I know not. Neither is he able to inform me, but suppose as it must have been, by the way, neither is he able to inform me. Okay, there's another indication of the direct communication that Oliver's getting his information from Joseph Smith. I mean, he can't just make up the story himself.
Right.
And Oliver and Joseph Smith's going to be okay with this, especially when it comes to what the angel tells him, right? Okay. So everybody's gone to bed. While continuing in prayer for a manifestation in some way that his sins were forgiven, endeavoring to exercise faith in the scriptures, on a sudden, a light like that of day, only of a purer and far more glorious appearance and brightness, burst into the room. Indeed, to use his own description, once again, there's a connection. The first sight was as though the house was filled with consuming and unquenchable fire. This sudden appearance of a light so bright, as must naturally be expected, occasioned a shock or sensation visible to the extremities of the body. It was, however, followed with a calmness and serenity of mind, and an overwhelming rapture of joy that surpassed understanding. And in a moment, a personage stood before him. Notwithstanding the room was previously filled with light above the brightness of the sun, as I have before described, yet there seemed to be an additional glory surrounding or accompanying this personage, which shone with an increased degree of brilliancy, of which he was in the midst. And though his countenance was a lightning, okay, or as, I think it's probably as lightning. There are a couple of typos in this transcript that I saw. As lightning, lightning is misspelled in the original, though, as opposed to lightning. Yet it was of a pleasing, innocent, and glorious appearance, so much so that every fear was banished from the heart, and nothing but calmness pervaded the soul. It is no easy task to describe the appearance of a messenger from the skies. Indeed, I doubt there being an individual clothed with perishable clay who is capable to do this work. To be sure, the Lord appeared to his apostles. Oh my gosh. Okay, the Lord appeared to his apostles after his resurrection, and we do not learn as they were in the least difficultied to look upon him. But from John's description upon Patmos, that's Revelation, we learn that he is there represented as most glorious in appearance. And from other items in the sacred scriptures, we have the fact recorded where angels appeared and conversed with men, and there was no difficulty on the part of the individuals to endure their presence, and others where their glory was so conspicuous that they could not endure. The last description or appearance is the one to which I refer when I say that it is no easy task to describe their glory. Thank you for taking that paragraph to explain that to us, Oliver. But it may be well to relate the particulars as far as given. The stature of this personage was a little above the common size of men in this age. His garment was perfectly white and had the appearance of being without seam. Maybe that's just because he was floating like a foot off the floor. He gave the impression of being taller than most people. Had the appearance of being without seam. Now that's an interesting little detail, of course, harking back to Jesus's cloak or robe or whatever it was in the New Testament and the gambling for them by the Roman soldiers, because what? It was of one seam. Now, there is a bracketed comment here. Oliver Cowdery identified this personage as Moroni, period, end of bracket. I thought that was stunning, so I went back and checked the original. No, it's not there. There is no place in this entire article where Oliver identifies the angel as Moroni. He doesn't even mention M-A-R-O-N-I in the third person. But they put that in there. This is in Scripture Central, okay? I'm going to tell you something. The first place that Moroni appears is in Doctrine and Covenants, the 1835 first edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, where the name is given, okay? I did a search for when was Moroni first given, and it said 1835, and it said it appeared in the Doctrine and Covenants and in Oliver Cowdery's account. I think AI picked up on this bracketed comment and wrongly attributed this to Oliver Cowdery's account because the people at Scripture Central, or wherever I'm getting this from, did the same thing. Any thoughts about that? Because that strikes me as really unusual and a touch overboard that somebody would put in brackets. Oliver Cowdery identified this personage as Moroni, when to the best of my understanding, and I've been over it with a fine-tooth comb, I think, he did not do so. Okay.
I would like to know what the basis for the bracketed material is. The brackets should have, there should be some reason that somebody decided that that was a justified insertion there. But without a footnote or any reason, I have no idea why they would do that. I think as you read all of that kind of in succession from this letter, one of the things I'm struck by is just how different the cadence, the grammar, the word choice is
So
from
different.
Joseph Smith and from the Book of Mormon. This is far better written. It's far more understandable. It doesn't have the issue with like non-ending run-on sentences. So I'm just struck by how different Oliver sounds, how different Oliver's thoughts sound than Joseph Smith's. And Joseph Smith's thoughts sound very similar to the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, to go along with that, again, RFM, you and I showed the Richard Bushman quote up on the screen at the end of Wednesday's episode. Bushman talks about the 1838 account and how polished it is. He doesn't say it directly, but he's insinuating that it almost certainly is Sidney Rigdon, or I think George Robinson is the other gentleman who is articulating that 1838 account. If we apply those same rules, you said earlier, maybe, it doesn't seem likely that Oliver Cowdery is going rogue and creating his own Moroni story. But I think, and so the suggestion is, one option is that Joseph Smith is feeding Cowdery the narrative and Cowdery's writing it down. I think another option is that Joseph Smith, just like the 1838 account, is giving Oliver Cowdery some leeway to polish an account about Moroni. So it may not be Joseph Smith's story exactly. It may be the major details of Joseph Smith, but Oliver Cowdery, just like Rigdon and Robinson, creating on his own a polished account, if that makes sense.
It may be a tacit recognition on Joseph Smith's part that Oliver Cowdery will do a better job at this than Joseph. Plus the fact that having Oliver Cowdery say it, I don't know, it kind of buttresses Joseph's account just by having somebody else be a second witness. Any thoughts from you, Randy, at this point?
Just that I think you've covered the details quite well. Frankly, I'm learning things I haven't heard before. I've heard in part. But I as a general comment, I'll just say that the Interpreter Foundation, Fair Mormon, this stuff, when the church blew up in my life years ago, 10, 12 years ago, I was desperate to hang on. I wanted to believe. I was not excited about the information I couldn't unsee. So I went to all these apologetic groups, and what I saw were absurd explanations, and with even the slightest pushback, their arguments just crumbled. So I think the apologists, you can't trust a word they say without going back and verifying them. And that's what, frankly, I love particularly about Bill. I mean, it's just, both of you, all three of you really,
Especially
you build
Bill.
a case on evidence, and it stands up to scrutiny that this other stuff just doesn't.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
I just want to note this. You're talking about this being the earliest mention of Moroni, not this particular, but 1835 being this earliest mention of Moroni.
Yeah.
I just want to note, again, years later, but David Whitmer tells a story about him and Cowdery and Smith meeting Moroni on the side of the road. It's a late recollection, but it's pointing to an earlier moment. I don't know what the year is of that moment. It seems like it's somewhere around the publishing of the Book of Mormon. He doesn't name the angel in the account. He just says that he was informed that it was the angel who had deposited the plates in the hill that Joseph Smith had gotten. I think it's interesting that Whitmer doesn't name the angel. I was just trying to look up, and maybe I'll say something when I get another chance later. I'm looking up the Mary Whitmer account to see if Moroni is specifically named.
Hello, Mary.
But I think it's at least, hello, Mary. Yeah, but I think it's at least interesting to note Whitmer's pointing to an earlier, almost certainly than 1835. He's describing Moroni or Nephi, but he's describing Moroni. I say that obviously jokingly, you guys get it. The audience, there is this one account. I think we'll probably mention this at some point, right? There is this one account where Nephi sort of is Moroni in name. But I find it interesting that Whitmer doesn't name the angel. Meanwhile, it's late. He should very well understand the characters of the Book of Mormon, just like the rest of us spending our life in Mormonism, understand the names of the characters of the Book of Mormon.
Well, it's not so much the characters of the Book of Mormon. It's the name of the angel who shows up to give Joseph Smith the plates, who is not associated with anybody in the Book of Mormon yet, apparently. And this came up in your debate with Robert Gurr, by the way. This was a very interesting point because he was making an argument. And then you looked at the source that he was giving. You said, wait a second, the language of the source actually is contradicting the way you're using it. And the reason was because, was it Martin Harris who said that he hadn't heard the name Moroni before? Do you remember that, Bill?
What I'm remembering is Whitmer reports not knowing the name Cumorah before.
Oh, maybe it was Cumorah, not Moroni. Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
and I will.
That-
go ahead, please, Kolby.
I was just going to say on the dating of that account, Bill, to try and answer that. So it comes from September 7th and 8th, 1878. But because it's talking about them transporting, that David is transporting Joseph and Oliver to the Whitmer home in Fayette, it would have to be around June 1st, 1829. So it would have taken place before this 1835 version was written.
Are we going to talk about the Mary Whitmer experience today?
No.
So then let me
We're talking about showing up to Joseph. That's the main thing.
Then I think it's a big deal to put this up on the screen then and just show it so we don't forget this. I'm going to take your thing, down for just a second and add this up. I'm going to make this bigger. I want to just note here on the left, I have heard my grandmother. So this is one of the grandkids. I don't, again, I'm not having enough time to spend in this account. I'm just pulling it up now, but I thought this is interesting. I have heard my grandmother, Mary M. Whitmer, say on several occasions that she was shown the plates of the Book of Mormon by a holy angel whom she always called Brother Nephi. She undoubtedly refers to Moroni, the angel who had the plates in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's how the wrinkles of history are iron smooth, because she undoubtedly didn't mean what she said.
Yeah, I mean, she saw an angel and she spent her life in Mormonism. She treasured the Book of Mormon. She treasured her spiritual experience, and all her life, that was Nephi to her.
Mm-hmm. In the same way that I think we have two accounts, or one account that's being split between two people. We've got one sort of angel who's being split between two personages. And there's this unsettled period during which the identities and the accounts are not firmly set because they're still in flux. And then finally, they do become in flux. And like you said, the remarkable thing, and once again, a spoiler alert for everybody if you don't know, that in the 1838 official account of the first vision in the original manuscript, Joseph gives the Moroni story, but Moroni, instead of saying, behold, my name is Moroni, says, behold, my name is Nephi, which is a strange thing. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But thank you for bringing that up, Bill. So let me see here. Okay, so we talked about that. It continues. Oh, and I went to the original in the actual Messenger and Advocate to show that bracketed thing does not appear there.
And I guess to go back to that bracket, the idea of the bracket, now that I've thought more on your question, why are they saying Oliver Cowdery identified this personage as Moroni? Because they are presuming that all of these things have to be reconciled and consistent, right? That's probably where they're doing that, is they know it's Moroni because that's what comes later, but that doesn't allow for Oliver Cowdery's 1835 version of, obviously he's getting it secondhand from Joseph Smith, but it doesn't allow for this account to stand on its own. They're presuming univocality.
Yes. And you know what? That bracket right there is very similar to these parentheses.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Where she undoubtedly refers to Moroni, the angel who had the plates in charge.
Right.
All right. So this is the voice of the future coming back to correct the past and say, you need to get in line with the future. And that's kind of like the whole presentism thing and the dangers of it when it's correctly understood. All right. Moroni gives Jesus's words in the 1838 first vision. So here is Oliver Cowdery, who's going to be quoting the heck out of Moroni, apparently as Joseph Smith gives to him. And he's going to be quoting a lot of things from the Bible, including things that we associate from the 1838 account with the first vision. Though fear was banished from his heart, I think that's another typo. It is a typo. I remember I read the entirety of it in the Messenger and Advocate as well. Yet his surprise was no less when he heard him declare himself to be a messenger sent by commandment of the Lord to deliver a special message and to witness to him that his sins were forgiven and that his prayers were heard and that the scriptures might be fulfilled, which say, another bracket, which is not in the original, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world and things which are despised has God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things which are, that no flesh should glory in his presence. Therefore, says the Lord, and another bracket, these are scriptural references identifying where Moroni is getting these from the Bible. I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. Well, we know that one. That's from Isaiah 29. The wisdom of their wise shall perish, and the understanding of their prudence shall be hid. For according to his covenant which he made with his ancient saints, his people, the house of Israel, must come to a knowledge of the gospel and own that Messiah whom their fathers rejected, and with them the fullness of the Gentiles be gathered in to rejoice in one fold under one shepherd. This is amazing that we have really a whole lot of information that's being put in the mouth of Moroni in this account, the 1835 account by Oliver Cowdery, which doesn't show up in the 1838 account. None of this is in there, to my recollection, in the mouth of Moroni there. This cannot be brought about, once again, he's still quoting Moroni, this cannot be brought about until first certain preparatory things are accomplished, for so has the Lord purposed in his own mind. He has therefore chosen you as an instrument in his hand to bring to light that which shall, a couple of references there from Isaiah 28 and 29, that which shall perform his act, his strange act, and bring to pass a marvelous work and a wonder. Wherefore the sound shall go, it shall cause the ears of men. I think it shall go forth.
Wherever the sound shall go.
Thank you. Wherever the sound shall go, it shall cause the ears of men to tingle. And wherever it shall be proclaimed, the pure in heart shall rejoice. While those who draw near to God with their mouths, once again, going back to Isaiah 29, and honor him with their lips. Now, this is really the place where we recognize the words that are being attributed to Moroni as also being attributed to Jesus in the 1838 account when he's talking to Joseph Smith in the Grove.
That alone is really significant, RFM. I'm really glad that you're sharing this because I've never read this letter before. And seeing, again, you guys hit this point really well on Wednesday's show, how Joseph Smith, one of the most significant differences between the 1832 and 1838 accounts is Joseph Smith is taking words and conclusions that he literally tells you in the 1832 account that he reached, that all churches had apostatized from the truth. He says that he had reached that conclusion by his own study of the scriptures. He then puts that into the mouth of God in 1838. It is significant to me that these words from Isaiah 29 end up in Jesus's mouth in the 1838 account, but here they're coming from Moroni. That is a really significant find to me.
Thank you. I think it is too. I'm not taking credit for it, but I think it is. While those who, once again, this is quoting Moroni, while those who draw near to God with their mouths and honor him with their lips, while their hearts are far from him, will seek its overthrow and the destruction of those by whose hands it is carried. Therefore, marvel not if your name is made a derision and had as a byword among such, if you are the instrument in bringing it by the gift of God to the knowledge of the people. All right, and I'm going to take a break there just to go to the Joseph Smith history where he is quoting Jesus in the sacred grove. Remember, it's Jesus who does all the talking after God shows up and introduces Jesus to Joseph. After that, Jesus takes it from there and says everything. Verse 19, can you read that, Randy?
Sure. This is one of my favorites. I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. And the personage who addressed me said that all their creeds were an abomination in his sight, that those professors were all corrupt, that they draw near to me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They teach for doctrines of the commandments of men, having a form of godliness, but they deny the power thereof. And as you guys know, in the courtroom, you use an absolute, a word like everyone, no one, all, every time. An absolute is a really dicey claim. It's a big claim. And here we have three absolutes: all creeds, all corrupt, all an abomination. They're putting words in God's mouth. They're all wrong. You find one exception to that, and everything blows up. And a single explanation, just take the creeds. The Bible is full of creeds. Creeds are simply statements of belief. That's all they are. Paul made several of them. They're all over the place. So there are lots of creeds that go undisputed. And again, this whole claim blows up.
That claim, by the way, is the exact thing that David Alexander called Jacob Hansen out for not sharing with Ali Beth Stuckey. This is the thing that Mormons never really want to talk about that's in the First Vision account, because as they try and make nice with mainstream Christianity, these absolutes that you're talking about, Randy, which are attributed to Jesus by Joseph Smith, have become mighty inconvenient. And so they pretend that they don't exist, or then you'd have to explain why the resurrected Lord, who is supposedly perfect, is making mistakes in his use of absolutes.
Yeah.
I have pointed it out twice before, but it bears repeating that it's remarkable and it warms my heart how your thought process aligns so perfectly with that of David Alexander, Kolby.
Yeah, stop helping me, please.
Can I just note that, again, if all the professors are corrupt and all their creeds are corrupt, aren't these the same people who came up with Good Friday and Passover week? And
Ruh-roh, Raggy.
yeah, just anyway.
And one more point is that these proclamations to the world that the church pumps out, those are creeds. They call them proclamations because, of course, they can't call them creeds. That's what they are. They're statements of belief. They're creeds. So it's okay for the Mormon church to use creeds as long as they change the name to proclamations. But anybody else, including in the Bible or Christianity, anywhere else, they're all wrong. It's bizarre.
The proclamation on the family is a creed.
Yeah.
So is the living Christ, though it doesn't get as much play.
My other thought is, and Bill kind of touched on this, but if all of the professors of Christianity are corrupt, why do we see Joseph Smith borrowing ideas from Adam Clark ever? Like, why would that ever happen? If everyone was corrupt, that should not be happening.
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to try and apologize on that, but it's not really going to go anywhere. That's a tough one to overcome for an apologist. Okay, Oliver Cowdery continues. He then proceeded, not Moroni. He then proceeded and gave a general account of the promises made to the fathers and also gave a history of the Aborigines of this country and said they were literal descendants of Abraham.
Can I pause you for a second? That general account of the promises made to the fathers, you all know this, but it's interesting to see a link with literal descendants of Abraham, because that phrase, promises made to the fathers, is what's replete throughout the first chapters of the book of Abraham.
That's right. And that's going to start there in 1835 too.
Right. What month was this letter written? Do you remember?
This is early. This is like February, or I think it's like February. It's early in the month, but there's also going to be, it was a patriarchal blessing given by Joseph Smith Sr. that has the same language word for word as appears in one of those verses in the first chapter of Abraham about seeking for the blessings of the fathers. So this is very similar as well. You're right. All right. He goes on. He represented them as once being an enlightened and intelligent people, possessing a correct knowledge of the gospel and the plan of restoration and redemption. He said this history was written and deposited not far from that place, and that it was our brother's privilege, if obedient to the commandments of the Lord, to obtain and translate the same by the means of the Urim and Thummim, which were deposited for that purpose with the record. I'll just say here that we can see that Urim and Thummim, which first gets applied to the interpreters or the seer stone in 1833, is now picked up in 1835 and recast and thrown back into history as if it had been called Urim and Thummim from the very beginning.
The other thing I'm struck by is this statement that they possessed a correct version of the plan of restoration and redemption. As we know, the Mormon plan of salvation evolves after 1835, but the current version of the way Mormons understand the plan of salvation isn't found in the Book of Mormon. So that's a very interesting thing to have there.
You're right, it is. And I'll tell you one of the things that's interesting. There's many things that are interesting, but one of the things that's interesting is what the Book of Mormon has to say about the redemption or the salvation of those who die without hearing the gospel. And what the Book of Mormon says about those who die without hearing the gospel is they'll be saved because they died without hearing the gospel, period. If you're not given a chance, then you can't be condemned by a law that you did not receive. So that's the Book of Mormon's take on it. It's an early take, and it does get changed very much in a number of times into this idea of temple work for the dead. Yet, said he, the scripture must be fulfilled before it is translated. Now, this is interesting because Moroni Oliver has the angel saying to Joseph Smith in 1823 that before you translate it, you've got to have the whole Charles Anton experience. Yet, said he, the scripture must be fulfilled before it is translated, before the Book of Mormon is translated, which says that the words of a book which were sealed were presented to the learned, for thus has God determined to leave men without excuse and show to the meek that his arm is not shortened, that it cannot save. Now, this would be what I think is to my mind, a very obvious taking of something that happened subsequent to this and putting it back as a prophecy in Moroni's mouth. I can't prove that. There are other things that I can prove, which we'll get to. But this one seems obviously like something that the angel would not have said. It's not in any other account. But now it's going to be something that is part of church history that happened after 1823. So we're going to put the words into the angel's mouth in 1823, showing that he knew about it beforehand and prophesied of it. Any comments?
He's talking about the plates here, right?
Yeah, he's talking about translating the Book of Mormon.
The sealed
and he's talking
part,
about going, Charles Anton, that whole experience with Martin Harris and the characters, has to happen before you can translate the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, the sealed part, said he, contains the same revelation which was given to John upon the Isle of Patmos.
Yeah, that's an interesting detail too, huh?
It is, right? Like the sealed portion is the brother of Jared, Mahanri Moriankamer, writing down all the things that have ever happened and will happen upon the earth.
Yeah.
There's a connection here that is, again, the most reasonable thing is Joseph is borrowing a theme, putting it in the Book of Mormon, but which would really be sort of difficult. I guess John of Patmos, his revelation doesn't deal with everything that had happened before and after. It's a much briefer account of all of that anyway. I don't know.
It wouldn't take 2/3 of the plates to contain the Book of Revelation. I think the most charitable understanding of this is that what that is supposed to be is the interpreted and understood explanation of everything that John is hinting at in his revelation. In other words, it's all obscure, it's all symbolic, but we're going to spell it all out for you in thousands of pages, probably.
In setting aside Brother Jared for a second, the other thing that's interesting about linking it to Revelation, Book of Revelation, is we're told that Nephi sees the same vision, but that he's told he cannot write it down. He's specifically because it's given to John to tell that story. So there's a little bit of I would say there's a little bit of a internal contradiction here. If that's true, then why does it exist on the sealed part of the Book of Mormon plates?
Well, God always liked the brother of Jared best.
That's why he gave him a name. Such a great name.
Yes. And so you jumped into that, Bill. I want to read this paragraph just so we have the full record. A part of the book was sealed. So this is, once again, the angel talking to Joseph Smith, according to Oliver. A part of the book was sealed, we know that, and was not to be opened yet. The sealed part, said he, contains the same revelation which was given to John upon the Isle of Patmos. And when the people of the Lord are prepared and found worthy, then it will be unfolded unto them. Boy, the Latter-day Saints have had a long period of not being worthy, haven't they? It's been like 200 years, and they're not worthy enough to receive that sealed portion yet. On the subject of bringing to light the unsealed portion of this record, it may be proper to say that our brother, Joseph, was expressly informed that it must be done with an eye single to the glory of God. If this consideration did not wholly characterize all his proceedings in relation to it, the adversary of truth would overcome him, or at least prevent his making that proficiency in this glorious work which he otherwise would. Now, that's the unsealed portion. I misread that the first time I was reading it. Not today, but originally. I had thought that was talking about the sealed portion, but now he's talking about the part that we have as the Book of Mormon today, the unsealed portion. Mm-hmm. And here's the end. While describing the place where the record was deposited, He, the angel, gave a minute relation of it, and the vision of his mind being opened at the same time, Joseph's apparently, he was permitted to view it critically, and previously being acquainted with the place, which I underline, he was able to follow the direction of the vision afterward, according to the voice of the angel, and obtain the book. I close for the present by subscribing myself, as ever, your brother in Christ, Oliver Cowdery, messenger and advocate, February. So early, 1835, February 1835. And the reason I underline previously being acquainted with the place is that this helps give information, which makes the 1838 account more understandable. Remember, Bill, I was talking about how in the 1838 account, it's completely confusing as to how it is that Joseph Smith knows where the right place is on the hill Cumorah, because he doesn't say that he was previously acquainted with the place. He just says he knew it as soon as he saw it, right? Or once he got there. Once he got there, he knew it, which lent itself to, how does he know? And doesn't one area of the hill look pretty much like every other area? And what was it about this vision? Well, apparently he had previously been acquainted with the place. So maybe, I don't know, the trees and the bushes on the hillside look different in this place, but he knew where it was. So that was interesting to me, that actually Oliver Cowdery's account answers a question that is raised by a lack of information in the 1838 account.
Yeah, and he knew that hill well enough, right? He's previously acquainted with the place that he was able to follow the direction of the vision afterward. So he's familiar with the hill. And again, Dan Vogel has posited in a dialogue article that I think there's 14, 17, somewhere in that number, treasure digs in the Palmyra area, many of them, if not most of them, involving Joseph Smith and his family. And that hill was a prominent hill. It would have stood out as one of the places to consider digging whenever they were doing this, because as we've shown before, the digs aren't digging 10 feet down into the ground like you're digging a well. It's digging into the sides of hills and digging out large cavern type of spaces. So you would need a big hill to begin with.
And one of those treasure digs actually took place on the hill Cumorah. When I was recently working on an LDS discussions episode about the stone box, what happened to the stone box, there's this account from Lorenzo Saunders, who was one of the money diggers involved in Joseph Smith's company, that they went to go search the hill the Sunday after Joseph Smith supposedly received the plates, and that all they could find was the hole that they had dug the year previous. So that would have fallen in that 1825, 1826 time frame when most of those treasure digs took place.
Let me put up a couple comments that I had made about Oliver Cowdery's account. We may be surprised that as late as 1834-35, he may have written it in late 34 and been published in February of 1835. That's why that date. Oliver Cowdery, number one, makes no mention of the first vision. And number two, has the angel speak words that are attributed to the first vision in the 1838 account. We've talked about that. But it is perhaps even more surprising that Joseph Smith's mother does the same thing in her biography of her son, the prophet. In 1845, Lucy Mack Smith, number one, does not mention the first vision, and number two, has the angel say things that the 1838 history has Jesus saying in the first vision. Now, this is 10 years later after Oliver Cowdery's letter is written, and yet it follows the same pattern. One wonders, was she relying on that for her information? Why wouldn't she be relying on other documents? I don't know. But here is the Joseph Smith Papers Project, which has the relevant portion of her manuscript and the transcript of it, where Lucy Mack Smith in 1845 is talking about the Angel Moroni's visit to her son, Joseph. Let me see here. Randy, could we get you to read this? I think it's just this one slide. Yeah, it is. It's just this one slide. Can you see that from where you are?
Sounds good. The 3 harvest time had now arrived since we opened our new farm, and all of our sons were actively employed in assisting their father to cut down the grain and storing it away in order. One evening, we were sitting till quite late, conversing upon the subject of the diversity of churches that had risen up in the world and the many thousand options that exist in existence as to the truth contained in the scripture.
Can I stop you there for a second, Randy? Yeah. First, as opposed to options, it's opinions. So many thousand opinions in existence as to the truths contained in Scripture. The reason I want to make sure that that word opinions is
Oh,
correct is
thank
because,
you.
once again, we're seeing the foundation and the backdrop being set for what? The first vision, right?
Yeah.
We're all sitting there talking about all the 1,000 opinions in existence as to the truths contained in the Scripture. Nobody knows which church is right. That's what we're talking about. And here's what happens as a result. Please continue, Randy.
Okay. Joseph never said many words upon any subject, but always seemed to reflect more deeply than common persons of his age upon everything of a religious nature. After we ceased conversation, he went to bed and was pondering in his mind which of the churches were the true one, but he had not laid there long till he saw a bright light enter the room where he lay and looked up and saw an angel of the Lord standing by him. The angel spoke, I perceive that you are inquiring in your mind which is the true church. There is not a true church on earth, no, not one, and has not been since Peter took the keys of the Melchizedek priesthood after the order of God into the kingdom of heaven. The churches that are now upon the earth are all man-made churches. There is a record for, well, that's just a reference.
Yeah, and that's going to go on into what it is that to something else, really. But this is the main part that I wanted to focus on. And you were stroking your beard there, Kolby, as Randy was reading. Why were you doing that?
Because so we were just talking about this inconsistency where Joseph Smith, in the 1832 account of the first vision, he says that he studied the scriptures and came to the conclusion that we just heard Lucy Mack through Joseph put into the mouth of Moroni. So keep track of this. In 1832, Joseph Smith's study of the scriptures leads him to the conclusion that there's this general apostasy, that there is no true church upon the face of the earth.
Mhm.
Then in 1845, this story that Lucy would have had to hear from Joseph Smith, unless she heard it directly from the angel, that's the only person she could have received it from. It is Moroni. Well, actually, does she give the name of the angel? She
No.
does not.
No.
So it is an unnamed angel that delivers the message of this great apostasy. Then in 1838, according to Joseph Smith, it comes into the mouth of Jesus. So we have three different originations of this idea, according to Joseph Smith, depending on who he's talking to and what time period.
Interesting. Bill, you look pensive.
Yeah. Why does Moroni need to tell Joseph Smith that there is no true church upon the earth when Jesus Christ has already done so in the first vision that we use in the church?
Well, it was 3 years in between. Somebody else might have restored it. Who knows?
In the mouth of
Yeah.
2 or 3 witnesses, Bill.
Yeah, and maybe that's the apologetic response you give, or maybe the apologetic response is that Lucy Mack Smith is mixing up things. But the most reasonable way to approach this is to again trust what Lucy's saying and acknowledge that Joseph Smith's narrative is changing about when things happen and when he's informed of stuff and when he changes his mind and when he comes to conclusions. Yeah, there's a mixing of the stories here, and if you take Mormonism's truth claim seriously and not make excuses for it and not lead with the conclusion that you want, this seems problematic.
Yeah, and to that point, Bill, I think a lot of times apologists or people who are believers don't understand when we talk about some of these inconsistencies. It's not necessarily critics saying, therefore, these things absolutely didn't happen, or there wasn't some true kernel of some event that happened to Joseph Smith or some experience that he had that he isn't trying to recount accurately. It's just recognizing that when we have this many disparate threads of these stories getting melded together, it goes to the weight, right? So RFM and Randy, when you're talking about dealing with evidence in court, a lot of times there's the question of admissibility, like should something even be allowed in a trial? And then there are questions that go to the weight of the evidence, meaning that the jury, in most instances, needs to decide what is the most reasonable conclusion to reach based upon these disparate versions of the facts. And the simple fact for at least my brand of criticism and skepticism towards these accounts is when I see all these different spaghetti threads all over the place, it's not me saying I don't believe there isn't something behind these experiences. I actually do. It's that I'm just not willing to believe any of these accounts as being like absolutely gospel truth. Like, unfortunately, you kind of are required to believe in any of these narratives because there are so many different versions of the same story. So I can acknowledge something likely happened, but in fact, the fact that there are all these different versions of that something that might have happened goes to the weight of how seriously and literally to take these events as having happened.
I'm going to give Randy
Oh,
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, Randy.
I was just going to say that's another way of saying that all great lies have an element of truth. And that's kind of the fun of looking at Mormonism is you have to literally untangle the elements of truth from the lies. And they're interwoven. They just are.
This is another good example. I'm just going to bring it up again. I'd like it to be in the forefront of our minds, if that's okay. It's why it is that I think that this started as one story and then it ended up getting split into two over time. And it didn't happen overnight. It continues. The early story continues even beyond the first story being told and told in different ways. And so it's very, very interesting to me. But I just want to throw that up there again. Once again, what is it that the angel is telling him? There's no true church on the earth. Joseph Smith doesn't even have to ask, right? Because the angel can read his mind. Joseph, I perceive that you're wondering about which church is true. And I'm here to tell you, none of them are. And once again, this is the same slide that I had earlier, which is Jesus telling Joseph Smith the exact same thing in response to his question about which church is true. But this is in the 1838 account.
The one last
Sorry,
from the one last thing I was struck by in Lucy's account is we get different opinions on how invested in religion Joseph Smith was at various parts in his life. But it's interesting to me that Lucy says that he always seemed to reflect more deeply than common persons of his age upon everything of a religious nature. So to people who think that Joseph Smith wasn't constantly thinking about these things, his own mother disagrees with that idea.
Yes. Thinking about it for years and years. Yes, Bill?
Yeah, that you put a piece up of Joseph Smith's history.
Yeah.
I think this is, what verse was that you showed up on the screen? Do you remember?
19.
Okay. 10 and 11. Again, you have these narratives where Smith already knows that all the churches are not true from 1832, his earliest account, in his own handwriting. And then you get to 1838, and in the midst of this war of words and this tumult of opinions, by the way, again, noting the other one we just read where there's all these opinions about all the various religions, I often said to myself, what is to be done? Who of all of these parties are right, or are they all wrong together? He doesn't know. If any one of them be right, in other words, there's the possibility that there is a true church already on the earth. Which is it? And how shall I know it? And while laboring under the extreme difficulties caused by the contest of these parties of religionists, I was one day reading the Epistle of James, 1st chapter, 5th verse, and we know that one, right? If any of you lack wisdom, blah, blah, blah. But the whole thing we tell people in the church is Joseph Smith went to the Bible and went to the book of James, 1st chapter, 5th verse. The whole reason he went there was because he thought maybe the true church is already on the earth, and I'd like to know which church it is. And then you get this 1832, the earliest story, saying he already knew that they were all not true.
And if you go down a little further, Bill, can you scroll down a few verses? Let's see.
You could probably recite this for us, Kolby.
Keep going a little farther. Okay. Okay, here it is right here. After I'd retired so he reads James 1:5, it enters into his heart with greater force than any scripture ever had before. After I'd retired to the place where I'd previously designed to go, having looked around me and finding myself alone, I kneeled down and began to offer up the desires of my heart to God. I had scarcely done so when I'm sorry, go down a little bit further. This is the thick darkness.
Yes.
It's after this.
Mm-hmm. I think it's 18.
No sooner, it's 17 actually. No sooner or 17 and 18. Yeah. It no sooner appeared than I found myself delivered from the enemy which held me bound. When the light rested upon me, I saw two personages. And then at 18, my object in going to inquire of the Lord was to know which of all the sects was right, that I might know which to join. No sooner, therefore, did I get possession of myself, so to be able to speak, that I asked the personages who stood above me in the light, which of all the sects was right. For at that time, it had never entered into my heart that all were wrong and which I should join. That is just a flat, aside from, Stephen Harper's heart and head distinction notwithstanding, that is a flat contradiction. That's an absurd argument. Stephen Harper would know that that's an absurd argument. Using heart and head, it's just interchangeable. Like metaphorical language, talking about that you'd never realized it before. He's saying explicitly, it had never entered into me. I had never thought before that all of them were wrong. Not according to himself in 1832.
This is a way more reasonable experience for a 14-year-old boy to have. The churches are all over the place. There's religious confusion.
Mhm.
I want to know what church is true. When I was 17, this was my question. I want to know, is Mormonism it? Is it somewhere else? This is reasonable. For the 15-year-old boy in 1832, because he's in his 16th year, to go, you know what? I'm 15 years old. I know they're all not true. That's such an arrogance. It's
That
like
sounds like a teenager to me.
Well, it does, but it's not a good religious narrative. You want to show up humble, wanting to know which church is true, and then, oh, it's the church I'm going to create. Oh, that's so amazing. It's such a more humble story in the 1838. It changes the motivations to make him more of a seeker rather than a knower.
It is a compelling story, and many people find it compelling, including myself, because it does so well describe what so many of us go through. And I just note that it took a number of years in order to mold it into that compelling form from its component parts.
And then it goes right into what Randy was saying, and I was answered that I must join none of them, because I wanted to join one of them. I wanted to know which one was true. I was answered that I must join none of them, for they were all wrong. Like, oh, I learned something new in this moment. And then like, oh, it's going to be me. It's such a more compelling, as you point out, it's a much more compelling narrative for religious conversion on our part as we're investigating the church and asking this question. Is that true?
It also is much more in line with his restorationist claims, right? Because if Jesus is the one who tells him that all the churches have apostatized and therefore we need this restoration, that's a much better narrative than just Joseph Smith, through his own study of the Bible, which is what we get in the 1832 account, comes to the conclusion that all the churches were false. In what way then does that separate him from like Martin Luther or other reformers? That's
Right.
more in line with reformation than it is with restoration.
Good point.
Do one of you guys remember what year Joseph Smith tried to join the Methodist Church?
I don't know, 1820 something.
Yeah.
After the first vision account should have happened,
Right.
Yeah.
but before Moroni, I
Yeah.
would say.
I got to give it to Mormonism. The 1838 account is a really slick narrative. It's very compelling. It draws on the right emotions. It makes, as Bill said, it makes more rational sense. But the problem is that Joseph Smith had left this trail of destruction prior to that, where he was here, there, and everywhere with his claims. And it's absolutely impossible to reconcile that with where they ultimately landed with that slick narrative in 1838.
I come up with June of 1828 for Joseph trying to be admitted to the Methodist Church.
Yeah. Can I, let me just hold on, because before the first vision, right, I became somewhat partial to the Methodist sect, and I felt some desire to be united with them. Maybe not the joining, but at least the serious consideration of joining is placed as being before the first vision. So maybe even 1819 or earlier.
Or maybe Joseph Smith is realizing that chronologically, it would not make sense for him to be seeking membership in a church in 1828 after God has already told him that it's wrong.
So he puts it earlier. Yeah.
Possibly. Or did it
And
twice?
to my
I don't know.
question, to my earlier question to you, Ephraim, about trying to separate from the treasure digs, like I pulled up that table of the treasure digs from Dan Vogel's work, and most of them took place in 25, 26. So if he needs to back something up, I'm not saying this is absolutely the case, but it makes sense to me that if you're Joseph Smith and you're trying to separate your calling and legitimacy as a prophet from your days in treasure digging, you need to go before 1825 and 1826.
Very good. This is a great panel. Thank you all for joining me. I'm learning a lot today too. Now, oh, look at what I put it there. Okay. So here are a few notes that I had made based upon what Lucy Mack Smith wrote. What proud mother would fail to mention her son met Jesus? And then I thought, only a proud mother who wasn't aware of the story.
And to someone who would say, well, that's just an argument from silence, it's actually worse, because not only does she fail to mention Jesus, she takes words that Joseph Smith later will attribute to Jesus and puts them in the mouth of Moroni.
Yeah. And from her point of view in 1845, it had already happened. So that's sort of makes it even more mysterious. And I say, only a proud mother who wasn't aware of the story would mention it. If so, Lucy was not, if this is correct, Lucy was not aware of any of the first vision accounts, 1832, 1835, 1838, or 1842, as of the time she wrote her history in 1845. And plus, I should say, Joseph never mentioned it to her. Otherwise, she would have known it and included it, one would think.
Yeah. One possible reason for that is that while we all want to make the assumption, at least on some level, that his family is super supportive of what he's doing and would go, again, considering a fraudulent narrative, would go along with his stories, maybe he's a little hesitant to mix up things that the family would see as obvious contradictions based on other narratives they were aware of involving treasure digging and other things going on.
That's an interesting idea. I then asked the question, and why is it that both Oliver Cowdery and Lucy Mack Smith agree in number one, not mentioning any kind of first vision experience, and number two, leading off with the angel's story while putting into the angel's mouth words that the 1838 Pearl of Great Price account gives to Jesus in the first vision? Now, once again, I can account for this by saying that for whatever reason, Lucy Mack Smith relied exclusively upon Oliver Cowdery's letters in the Messenger and Advocate in creating her history of her own son, Joseph Smith. But I think, why would you do that when you're the mom? You know, you're Joseph's mom.
Give Brother Joseph a break.
We'll do that. Thank you. Oh, by the way, just in case you didn't know this, after she wrote her book and Brigham Young was kind of miffed about it, the church added the first vision account to Lucy Mack Smith's book anyway. The 1838 vision, the 1838 account of the first vision, the Pearl of Great Price first vision account, got put in her story.
I'm sure that's what she would have wanted, as evidenced by her inclusion of it in the book.
Still a tissue of lies, but okay.
Yes, which is what Brigham Young called it. Yes, exactly, and ordered that it be destroyed out west. Spoiler alert, Oliver Cowdery never mentions Joseph Smith's first vision either here or anywhere else. Oliver Cowdery never mentions Joseph Smith's first vision. Once again, I got to talk about the recorded documents. We got nothing with him writing about it, and nothing with anybody else apparently saying that he talked about it.
Dude, at what point did David Whitmer apostatize?
I think it's 1838. That's pretty much when all of them left.
So Cowdery leaves in around 1835, right? Over Fanny Alger. That's in 1835. Yeah. And then Martin Harris leaves in around 1837, 1838. David Whitmer leaves at the same time. I guess I'm just struck by the fact that the first vision account in 1838 gives Joseph a legitimate chance to like reinvent the early history of the church, because the people who were concerned with it the most, Oliver, Martin, and the Whitmers, are no longer part of the church. We've had this huge apostasy because of the Kirtland Bank scandal. Keeping in mind these like different historical threads, I think, can explain how to look at these documents. I guess it's just the thought that I'm having.
Yeah.
And the thing about church history is it's so difficult, not just because it's complicated, but because it's so contradictory. And it's contradictory all over the place. So you're not just trying to learn a seamless narrative. You're trying to learn all the contradictions and how they happened in order that they were written down or heard by other people. Bill Reel?
I think it's at least worth considering that when Joseph writes down his 1832 account, it is intended to be a document or a story that goes off into the future, but doesn't have to disturb the people at the present moment. In other words, you're keeping a record that can be used over time, but which your closest associates who don't know anything about a first vision never have to confront.
That's a really interesting idea. Okay, so letter, by the way, I want to throw this in there because this is for you, Randy. Ready? I'm going to quote one of your very favorite scholars. His name's Jonathan Neville. And the whole thing is this letter 7. He's got a book called Letter 7. They have this is the Heartlander guys, right?
Yeah.
They have ball caps that have letter 7, Roman numerals, VII. I tried to find an image of one. I couldn't find one on the internet, but I know I've seen one before. This is very, very important to them because letter 7 is the 7th letter of Oliver Cowdery in this series, in which he makes it very clear that the Cumorah that's next door to Joseph Smith is the place where the freaking last battle took place. All right. And that's very important to the Heartlanders for obvious reasons, because Mesoamericanists have it down in southern Mexico or Guatemala. I think it's usually southern Mexico is where they put the final battle. So letter 7 declares, this is what he wrote, Jonathan Neville. Letter 7 declares as a fact that the final battles of the Nephites and Jaredites took place in the mile-wide valley west of the hill Cumorah in New York. The only problem with that is it's a clean site and there aren't any artifacts or anything found that would even indicate that a battle, much less 2 battles, much less with millions of people participating, had ever occurred there. Then I have this image over here that I also got, I think, from them, where it refers to letter 7 as a divine document. You see, when these old documents say what you want them to say and you really want them to say it badly, then it becomes divine. That's how it works. Because it matches Zelph and Onondagas. We're not going to go into that. That was just a brief aside. Now, Joseph Smith's, we're going to go to the next one. Joseph Smith's 1835 journal entry. So we've gone to 1832, Joseph Smith's journal or history. We've done 1835, which is mercifully going to be the longest one with Oliver Cowdery. And now later that year, 1835, Joseph Smith's journal, where he talks about his encounter with Robert Matthews, not Robert J. Matthews. What is this guy? What was he? The prophet, Jeremiah. What was his name? Do you remember, Bill? The name he went by, this Robert Matthews.
Yeah,
character.
Joshua, the Jewish minister.
That was it. Thank you so much. Okay, so Kolby, can you read this? Now, this isn't going to be too long, but this is in his journal, and this is about his encounter with Moroni, or excuse me, the angel.
I can read. Thank you, RFM. When I was about 17 years old, I saw another vision of angels in the night season after I had retired to bed. I had not been asleep but was meditating upon my past life and experience. I was very conscious that I had not kept the commandments, and I repented heartily for all my sins and transgression and humbled myself before him. The run-on sentences continue. Whose eyes are over all things. All at once, the room was illuminated above the brightness of the sun. An angel appeared before me. His hands and feet were naked, pure and white, and he stood between the floors of the room, clothed with in purity inexpressible. He said unto me, so he's saying clothed in purity inexpressible, basically, not clothed with impurity. Sorry. He said unto me, I am a messenger sent from God. Be faithful and keep his commandments in all things. He told me of a sacred record, which was written on plates of gold. Ah, man, he must not have known the word Tumbaga. I saw in the vision the place
he knows
where...
Skurlum and cumin, but he can't squeeze out a Tumbaga.
Yeah, it's so weird, huh? I saw in the vision the place where they were deposited. He said the Indians were the literal descendants of Abraham. He explained many of the prophecies to me. By
the way, literal descendants of Abraham is a kind of a unique phrase that is in common now between Joseph Smith's journal in 1835 and Oliver Cowdery's recitation that he says he got from Joseph, which was published earlier the same year.
which he explained many of the prophecies to me. One I will mention, which is in Malachi 4,
We
behold the
get
day
a
of the
first mention,
Lord.
by the way.
Right.
We get a first mention of the angel quoting scripture, and specifically Malachi 4.
It says, behold, the day of the Lord cometh, etc. Also that the Urim and Thummim was hid up with the record, and that God would give me power to translate it with the assistance of this instrument. He then gradually vanished out of my sight, or the vision closed. Oh, that's interesting. While meditating on what I had seen, the angel appeared to me again and related the same things and much more. Also, the third time, bearing the same tidings, and departed. During the time I was in this vision, I did not realize anything around me except what was shown me in this communication. After the vision had all passed, I found that it was nearly daylight. The family soon arose. I got up also.
Okay, so what was interesting?
Well, whether it's like stories like this or when apologists are talking about the vision of the three witnesses, they usually try and make this argument that like they've insisted that they knew these things actually happened, so they didn't see it with their spiritual eyes. And I guess I'm just struck by Joseph Smith again, like we saw in the earliest version that you shared with us, him allowing this to be a visionary and not a literal experience, when in the 1838 account it is always described as a literal experience.
Very good. Any thoughts from you, Randy, or Bill about this particular account?
I'm good.
No, Bill? Yes? Now, he does quote scripture before, but this is the first time where a reference is made
Right.
to scripture about Malachi 4. So, my notes, Joseph Smith's 1835 journal account, number 1, angel's name still not given. And number 2, it mentions the angel reciting prophecies and gives just one example of Malachi 4. We'll get to those prophecies here in a bit. 1838 church history account. Now, this is going to be the next account, right? And it's contained in the Pearl of Great Price. Hopefully, we're all familiar with this one because we're not going to read this one. Okay, so go get your scriptures and read it yourself. It gives the angel's name as Moroni. Sort of. We'll get to that in a second. Okay. Initially, it gave it as Nephi, but then it got changed. It explicitly places it 3 years after the first vision in which God and Jesus appear, which I think is one of the most substantial contributions of the 1838 account of the church history. It definitely distinguishes the two events as separated by 3 years, and they are two events. So here it is where Joseph Smith in the 1838 account says, he called me by name, talking about the angel, and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was Moroni. So here in 1838, Joseph Smith says that from the very beginning, from the inception, 1823, one of the first things that this angel tells him is his name, and that it was Moroni. Which makes me wonder, and I may have made a slide about it, why is it that after it took 12 years for Moroni's name to be identified in any account? He's supposed to have appeared in 1823. It's 1835 before it's mentioned, and that's in the Doctrine and Covenants. But here it's mentioned again in 1838. It's a strange thing. 1842 account of the angel. Okay, this is contained in the Wentworth letter. Now, Randy, could you read this? This isn't going to be too long, but this is from the Wentworth letter. It's 1842. Once again, this is Joseph Smith, I believe, authoring this. You know, every time something doesn't exactly line up with what the church teaches today, you've got a legion of apologists trying to explain why it was that Joseph Smith wasn't really involved in writing this, or somebody else did it, or is a rogue scribe. But would you read this for us?
Sure. On the evening of the 21st of September, AD 1823, while I was praying unto God and endeavoring to exercise faith in the previous promises of Scripture, on a sudden, a light like that of day, only as, sorry, I just don't speak this way, only of a far purer and more glorious appearance and brightness burst into the room. Indeed, the first sight was as though the house was filled with consuming fire. The appearance produced a shock that affected the whole body. In a moment, a personage stood before me, surrounded with a glory yet greater than that with which I was already surrounded. The messenger proclaimed himself to be an angel of God, sent to bring the joyful tidings that the covenant which God made with ancient Israel was at hand to be fulfilled, that the preparatory work for the second coming of the Messiah was speedily to commence, that the time was at hand for the gospel in all its fullness to be preached in power unto all nations, that a people might be prepared for the millennial reign. I was informed that I was chosen to be an instrument in the hands of God to bring about some of his purposes in this glorious dispensation.
Now, let me just check here and see if there's anything else beyond this. There is. Can you read this as well?
Sure. I was also informed concerning the Aboriginal inhabitants of this country, America, and shown who they were and from whence they came, a brief sketch of their origin, progress, civilization, laws, government, of the righteous and iniquity, and the blessings of God being finally withdrawn from them as a people, who also made known unto me. I was also told where were deposited some plates on which were engraven an abridgment of the records of the ancient prophets that had existed on this continent. The angel appeared to me 3 times the same night and unfolded the same things. After having received many visits from the angels of God, unfolding the majesty and glory of the events that should transpire in the last days, on the morning of the 22nd of September, AD 1827, the angel of the Lord delivered the records into my hands.
Thank you very much.
Hmm?
So there is the Wentworth letter. Now, it says up there, just so you know, it says July 2002 underneath the title. That's because that's the ensign year from which, July 2002, from which I got this. But this was written in 1842 and published it was written in 1842. It was never published by the Chicago newspaper, but this is when it was written. So any comments about this? I've got a few comments that I made on the next slide, but I'd like to hear your thoughts if you have any. First, Bill.
Yeah, if you go to I'm going to go to the previous slide.
Oh.
That's okay. So he said, indeed, the first sight was as though the house was filled with consuming fire. The appearance produced a shock that affected the whole body. And I'm immediately drawn back to the early treasure digger stories from Willard Chase and others, where they note that Moroni, when Joseph goes to take the plates before he's allowed to have them, that he is shocked and sent sort of shot back and falls upon the ground. I find it interesting that he also expresses this first moment with Moroni in his bedroom is also experiencing a shock as well. And again, my mind is drawn to the possibility that he has these early treasure digger stories that may always rear their ugly head and bite him in the rear end, and that he has to always prepare his later religious narrative to have components that if he's questioned, he can bail out and point to, oh yeah, I was shocked by the thing, but it was, and he can express himself in such a way as to keep one group of people who know the story one way and another group of people to rationalize in their minds. Like Joseph explained himself. He was shocked in the bedroom. I just find it interesting that there's a shock involved on the first night in the bedroom with Moroni as well.
Yeah, a lot of people experience a shock on the first night in the bedroom with Moroni, I hear. And it reminds me that in the Book of Mormon, remember, of course, it's Nephi's brothers who get shocked when they go to grab him because they want to hurt him. Hey, Kolby or Brandy, any thoughts about this Wentworth letter account from 1842?
I just had one. If you'll go to the next slide. It's interesting that, so we've talked a lot about Joseph remembering the chronology of events. It's interesting to me that, like, it's understandable that someone might mix up years when you're recounting events well after the fact. One of the things I'm struck by is it ends by him saying, on the morning of September 22nd, 1827, that he receives the plates. The angel of the Lord delivered the record into my hands. And every account I've ever heard is the the evening trip to the hill, him having to run from. Am I
Yeah.
misremembering something or?
No, it's after midnight.
Yeah, right.
It was
Okay,
the
so
21st until midnight. Then it became the
there's
22nd.
there's a huge difference between morning. Oh, you're saying so it was like late, I guess early morning after midnight on the 22nd. Okay, that would make more sense.
I'm trying to do my best to understand in terms of the way it's being expressed. So I don't know. He doesn't say that, but that's just how I thought of it.
Okay. Yeah, I guess that's possible. The point I was trying to make was there's a huge difference between an event happening in the morning of a certain day and it happening well after midnight or in the late evening of the same day. It's very difficult to mix those up in your memory, obviously, because the light is going to be completely different, right? And so my thought was, oh, I just have never heard that happened on the morning. But you're right. If it's morning of the 22nd, I suppose it could be morning before the sun has risen.
I think a lot of people would have said the night. I would have said the night, but maybe he was saying the morning.
That was my only thought.
Okay. Was there anything else anybody else wanted to say about this before we proceeded?
I just wanted to mention one thing I think we can all agree on is it mentions the ancient or the what he calls the Aboriginal inhabitants of this country, America, and then the brief sketch of their origins, process, civilization, laws, governments, and their righteousness and iniquity. That's exactly what Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph Smith's mother, said. And I guess my point being that we can all agree on Joseph Smith had an incredibly vivid, creative ability to narrate according to his mother, for hours on end about these stories of the prior inhabitants of the Americas. And you see it again here. You see it from his mother. And that's what the Book of Mormon is. It's a download of somebody with a very active, remarkable, vivid, creative imagination.
Yeah, and the quote. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and somebody who's extremely familiar with the Bible, both the Old and New Testaments, which I understand was the subject of study for the Nephites.
The other thing I'm struck by on that, Randy, is the quote that you're referencing from Lucy Mack. She says that he's able to describe their manner of living as if he had spent his whole life among them. That's what she says. And when I've used that phrase in the past, some apologists have pointed out to me, because they're trying to reconcile these stories, well, he must be getting that information from Moroni, which they're probably linking it with this exact account. But as we've already talked about, the problem with that is that Lucy never makes any mention of Moroni.
Yeah, good point.
Let me go ahead and go to this next one with some of my thoughts, okay? Number one, even in the 1842 Wentworth letter, Joseph does not mention the name of the angel as being Moroni or anything else, okay?
Nor the scriptures, right? He doesn't mention Malachi or the other scriptures that are shared in the 1838 version.
That's correct. And we do understand that he's writing a letter, and he's including the first vision. He's including so much, and then the articles of faith at the end. So I totally understand why he'd want to be extremely brief in his recounting of things here. But number two, the angel gives Joseph a brief sketch of the ancient inhabitants, etc. This is used by apologists to defend against Lucy Mack Smith's remark that Joseph would give amusing recitals at home. And this is where she says it, right? You want to read that, Kolby, since I think you brought it up?
Sure. During our evening conversations, Joseph would occasionally give us some of the most amusing recitals that could be imagined. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, mode of traveling, and the animals upon which they rode, their cities, and their buildings with every particular. He would describe their mode of warfare, as also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life with them.
I wonder what they were riding if it wasn't horses.
Tapers.
Is there a lot to ride in the United States or the Americas that's not a horse? I don't know. Maybe deer. But so this is a very interesting thing that Lucy Mack Smith recounts. And as I said, and as you mentioned, apologists will frequently say, well, this is why he was able to give these accounts, is because Moroni was filling his head with all these ideas from 1823, the very first appearance. So maybe that's so. I just wanted to bring that up for purposes of being thorough in our discussions. And I also want to bring up number one, even in the 1842 Wentworth letter, Joseph does not mention the name of the angel as being Moroni, which means that even after he has mentioned the name of the angel as being Moroni, or at least Nephi in 1838, that and Moroni in Doctrine and Covenants in 1835. Okay, so the angel does have a name of Moroni that even in 1842, 7 years later, Joseph Smith is giving an account and not mentioning the name of the angel. Therefore, not mentioning the angel does not mean that the name of the angel is not known. So that's another apologist, or at least looking at it from the other side of the coin. Okay, issue number one. I've got 6 issues that we're going to go through. We've already talked about a number of issues, but these are ancillary issues, very important. Issue number one, what is the relationship between the 1832 and 1838 accounts of the first vision and of the angel's visit? Now, I went through this in too much detail and deleted a bunch of slides, you'll be glad to know. But this is mainly it. Here in the 1838 account of the first vision, we know that Joseph Smith is asking God for forgiveness of all my sins and follies, and then Moroni shows up. Okay, that's the 1838 account. Let me be clear here, as clear as I can be, okay? In the 1832 account, it mentions the first vision, but only mentions Jesus. Joseph goes to ask for forgiveness of his sins, and Jesus shows up in the grove. Still in the 1832 account, after Jesus shows up in the grove, we have the story about the angel Moroni, and we read that earlier. And that is also presaged. I think I've used that word before. It's also caused by Joseph Smith, once again, praying for forgiveness of his sins. That is the motivating factor in both stories in the 1832 account. Okay, he's asking for forgiveness of sins. And here it is. We'd already read this before. In the 1832 account, okay, Joseph goes to the grove first, asks for forgiveness of sins. Jesus shows up and says, your sins are forgiven. 3 years later, Joseph is saying, I've been committing all these, sins, or I haven't done everything I should, and I feel bad about myself, and I feel guilty. So I'm praying to God again, and I want to have a remission of my sins. And Moroni shows up, and Moroni forgives his sins. And then Moroni says, and by the way, while I'm here, let me tell you about these gold plates and all of that stuff. So guess what Moroni, now back to the 1838 account, okay? In the 1838 account, let me just back up here before I go to this question. In the 1838 account, by contrast, when Joseph, the first vision, Joseph is not asking for forgiveness of sins anymore. He's asking to know which church is true. And in the 1838 account, when it comes to Moroni 3 years later, he starts by asking for forgiveness of his sins. This is the only time forgiveness of sins is mentioned now in the 1838 accounts. Okay, it's not in the first vision. He doesn't ask for it. He doesn't get it because he's asking which church is true, and he's finding out that none of them are. 3 years later, he's asking for forgiveness of sins. Moroni shows up, and in the 1838 account, guess what Moroni never mentions once in all of Joseph Smith history, 27 through 54. If you answered forgiveness of sins, you got it right. Moroni never forgives Joseph Smith's sins in the 1838 account, even though in the 1838 account, it is prompted by Joseph asking for, wanting to have forgiveness of sins. That's all I'm saying. In the 1832 account, he wants forgiveness of sins, and Moroni shows up and forgives his sins. So that detail gets omitted for whatever reason in the 1838 account.
I would actually say and we've kind of used this as a theme throughout today's episode, but I think that fact, along with other facts we've talked about, is good evidence that there is some legitimate experience that happened to Joseph Smith at some point, because we do have very similar themes from all of these stories that are getting remixed and changed based on which version of the story he's telling. So I think it's very possible that the reason that we see that, RFM, is because he's not able to keep all the different versions of the story straight, if that makes sense. So he remembers that these experiences that he's describing in the 1838 account, in essence, that they were prompted by him caring about forgiveness of sins. And then
Yeah.
he forgets to pick up that thread because he's changed the version from the 1832 account to the 1838 account, if that makes sense.
I think it's quite likely, and Richard Bushman might agree with me, that the initial core of this is Joseph Smith being convicted of his sins because of all the camp meetings and all the huge religious fervor and wanting to have forgiveness of sins and going and praying and having an experience where he felt that he was forgiven of his sins. And then
Right.
later on, as things develop and as gold plates and angels start showing up, things start getting changed around and added to. And then this one story gets split into two, which seem to have a confusion between the two as to which one is which because they have the same elements sometimes.
Exactly. In other words, let me say it this way. If Joseph Smith were making all of this up from the beginning, we likely would not see him lose plot threads like this in the 1838 account. That to me is actually an indication of something legitimately, like he's trying to recapture something that actually happened to him, because that's very common in real life to have a plot thread that never resolves itself. It's very uncommon if you're making a fraudulent account to have an unresolved plot thread like that.
Okay. Very good. Any thoughts from you, Bill, or Randy about this?
I'm kind of curious, Kolby, when you say that, I mean, what kind of examples or ideas do you think that might be in terms of a legitimate experience? I have a different view of Joseph Smith, so I'm just kind of curious where you're coming from.
I really don't know. I think I would look at it a lot like some type of, I would guess what he likely had is like a very common version of feeling like he was forgiven for his sins that connects more closely to the 1832 account, and then gets developed and gets aggregated more details and more miraculous claims over time. So that's what I mean, Randy. When I say that it's not fraudulent, I buy into Dan Vogel's pious fraud theory of Joseph Smith, which means that Joseph Smith knew that the things he was describing didn't occur as he was describing them, but that there was some type of like core, and I don't know exactly where the contours of that actual historical core would begin and end. I'm just saying that if we're testing hypotheses and we're saying which is more likely, that Joseph Smith is making all of this up from the beginning, I don't think we would see him lose plot threads if that were the case. Instead, I think it's much more likely that he's losing plot threads because he's mixing versions of the story that he's told over and over and over again. And so he's hooking into this idea of this was all prompted by me looking for forgiveness of my sins, but then he's forgotten the way he's changed the story over the years. That to me is a much more likely indication of at least some level of sincerity on Joseph Smith's part than that he's making it all up from the beginning. Does that help answer the way I see it?
Well, yeah, and I mean, you've obviously given this some thought, and that you may be very well right. I'm not a psychologist, but my read of Joseph Smith is a little different. I think he was a bona fide certified sociopath. He had no empathy. You can't have a conscience and do the things he did, where you're snowing your own mother, your own family, you're marrying a bunch of women behind your wife's back. I mean, you have a list as long as your arm of just horrific things that Joseph Smith did in terms of behavior. And I think he was the thing about sociopaths, and I'll keep this brief, is they get a charge out of telling lies and duping people. That's been explained to me by people who are qualified in that whole area of psychology. So, that for me resonates truer with Joseph Smith, because he did so many things that were just like, how on earth could you do that? Send people on missions and, take advantage of their wives while they're gone. It's this void of conscience. So again, you and Dan, I've talked to Dan about this. It may very well be right. We'll never really know, but I have a little more of a grim view of Joseph Smith's mental condition, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just say one last thing about it, which is I would agree largely with you on Joseph Smith, especially when we get to Nauvoo, right? He's prancing around town, having everybody call him, what was it, General Smith, Lieutenant General Smith. He's got the sword and the saber. And so I would agree with you. I think when we're talking about Joseph Smith later in his life, I think that it's more complicated when we look at Joseph Smith's earlier history and we try and isolate early Joseph Smith from later Joseph Smith. One of the big indications I see of Joseph Smith's sincerity is simply the amount of effort that he put into some of these projects. So even though the Book of Abraham, for example, is absolute complete nonsense, creating the grammar and alphabet of the Egyptian language with 3 scribes keeping tabs on exactly how he's translating, in the strongest of air quotes, these characters is legitimate effort that I think is more explainable on the hypothesis that he has some sincerity to him than that he is just a fraud. But this is not a hill I'm like willing to die on. It's just when I look at probability, I think it is more likely that there's some legitimate belief in Joseph Smith on some level, especially in the early days.
Yeah. Well, you made some good points. Yeah. We'll find out someday, I hope.
So trying to return, I appreciate the discussion between the two of you. So return to what I think we can see. What we know is that in the 1832 account, remember, this is just 6 years difference between 1832 and 1838. It's just 6 years. In the 1832 account, everything is about forgiveness of sins. First vision, I need forgiveness of sins. Jesus gives it. The angel showing up, I need forgiveness of sins again. The angel says, you're forgiven of your sins. And by the way, here's a book. Okay. But now we get into the 1838 account 6 years later, and forgiveness has basically left the building. It's not about that at all. It's completely about this restoration narrative. And that the first vision now becomes transformed to be a restoration narrative instead of forgiveness narrative. And Moroni, once again, Joseph Smith does say, I asked for forgiveness of sins. And that's what precipitates Moroni showing up. But Moroni never says you're forgiven of your sins the way he does in the 1832 account. It's all about the Book of Mormon. Now, before we go on, that's pretty much issue number 1. I might have a couple more things to say about it, but I do want to just underscore the fact that when it comes to Lucy Mack Smith and talking about the amusing recitals, we talked about how Joseph Smith's 1842 Wentworth letter account could be seen to support that. And then we also talked about, what was the other thing that I looked at from the apologist point of view? It was on here on a slide. I can bring it back up to refresh my recollection. Right. Even in the 1842 Wentworth letter, Joseph does not mention the name of the angel as being Moroni, which I used to support the proposition that even after he has used the name and knows the name, and we know he knows the name because of the documents, he still gives an account that doesn't mention the name. So that weighs into earlier accounts where he doesn't mention the name, as far as I'm concerned. Now, these are both things that apologists would argue. They aren't things that a person watching would necessarily know or think of, but they're things that I know and I think of. And I thought and continue to think it's important to give both sides of the story to the best of my ability, because my goal here is not to argue a case and just give you the evidence that supports my position and omit the evidence that's on the other side to try and persuade you to agree with me. That's not my point, and it's never been what I'm about as Radio Free Mormon. What I try and do is explore the issue and give you all the information so that then you can look at it and make your own conclusions. That's what I'm about. So I just wanted to underscore that's what I'm doing here, and I think it's important that I do that. So we went through issue number 1, which is the relationship between the 1832 and 1838 accounts. And guess what Moroni never mentions once in the 1838 account? And that's forgiveness. Okay, so Joseph Smith changed the first vision account from forgiveness in 1832 to restoration in 1838. That's the first vision account. Joseph retained seeking forgiveness as a primary motivator in the 1838 Moroni account, but Moroni never mentions forgiveness in the 1838 account as he does in the 1832 account. This leaves us with an 1838 account. This is the Pearl of Great Price account that, number 1, has Joseph not asking for or being granted forgiveness in the first vision, and number 2, has Joseph asking for but not receiving forgiveness from Moroni, which once again indicates to me that this is something that is a story that's in process of development.
It's also like what historians would call like the criterion of embarrassment, right? Like keeping something like this in, I think, is normally what historians would call like a criterion of embarrassment. Like it's something that isn't really reconcilable. And that's actually a pretty good mark. Again, I know we already talked about this, but to me, that's a pretty good mark that there's something more complex going on than just Joseph Smith is making it all up. Because if Joseph Smith were making it all up and he's shifting the focus from forgiveness to restoration in the 1838 account, he just wouldn't have included this bit about forgiveness being what prompts Moroni to come in the first place.
Okay.
Anyways, we've already tread this ground.
Yeah, it's an interesting textual analysis that you have there. I appreciate that, Kolby. Issue number 2, did Joseph Smith, once again, 206. Issue number 2, did Joseph Smith rewrite history in his 1838 Pearl of Great Price account of Moroni's visit? In other words, did Joseph Smith in 1838 have Moroni say things that Moroni would never have said in 1823 when he is alleged to have said them? Now, I had discovered one of these, and then I found that somebody else had discovered another. So let's go with that first one, the one that I had discovered, and let me know if you agree with me that we have an instance here where we can catch Joseph Smith rewriting history on the whole Moroni account. Now, first off, it seems clear from multiple accounts that Joseph Smith expected to receive the plates from Moroni or the angel on at least the first and second visits to Cumorah on September 21st of 1823 and 1824. He expects to come home with the plates and is disappointed because he failed to follow some commandment or condition. And I'm going to use to support this, this one fact about his wanting or expecting to receive the gold plates and presenting it that way to people who are close to him from the Joseph Knight Sr. recollection of early Mormon history. It is not dated. It does not have the first at least page. It begins in the middle of the Moroni story. But this is Joseph Knight, who was close to Joseph Smith and very faithful. And this, I think, was probably given or written about 1833. Though it is not dated, I think we can safely say it was 1833 because of what it talks about happening and where it stops in the history of the church, which seems to be around 1833. Okay, but this is what he says Joseph Smith said. Bill, can you read this part, the manuscript of the early history of Joseph Smith? And you'll see it's going to start in the middle of the action. But this is the beginning of what we have left.
We're missing something before this, huh?
We are, whatever that may be.
From thence he went to the hill, where he was informed the record was, and found no trouble, for it appeared plain as though he was acquainted with the place. Acquainted with the place. It was so plain in the vision that he had of the place. He went and found the place and opened it, and found a plain box. He uncovered it and found the book and took it out and laid it down by his side and thought he would cover the place over again, thinking there might be something else here. But he was told to take the book and go right away. And after he had covered the place, he turned round to take the book, and it was not there. And he was astonished that the book was gone. He thought he would look in the place again and see if it had not got back again. He had heard people tell of such things, and he opened the box, and behold, the book was there. He took hold of it to take it out again, and behold, he could not stir the book any more than he could the mountain. He exclaimed, "Why can't I stir the book?" And he was answered, "You have not done right. You should have took the book and have gone right away. You can't have it now." Joseph says, "When can I have it?" The answer was, "The 22nd day of September next, if you bring the right person with you." Joseph says, "Who is the right person?" The answer was, "Your oldest brother." By the way, I just want to say, I think it's neat that Joseph Knight, faithful member, is a second witness in these other, to go right along with these other accounts from the early treasure diggers, that because Willard Chase also says Smith was supposed to bring his older brother, and then it switches to Lawrence, which Willard Chase tells us, and then it switches to Emma Smith, which Joseph tells us. And here you have Joseph Knight validating that story has some truth to it.
On that consistency with these earlier accounts too, at the beginning of what you were reading on this page, Bill, it's interesting to me that the place where the plates lay is shown to Joseph Smith in a vision in this version and some of the earlier versions we've looked at, but that is not the way that it happens in the 1838 account. Probably to make the vision that Joseph Smith has, like the first vision, more to make it stand out more. There's less visionary experiences in the 1838 account. Does that make sense? Like here,
Well, doesn't Joseph write in the 1838 account that he received a vision of the place where the plates were buried, so much so that he knew it when he found it?
I didn't think that was in the 1838. I'll look while you continue.
Yeah, I've just been reading over all this stuff recently, so it may be fresher in my mind. I'm pretty sure, but you go ahead and check it out, okay? The thing I'm pointing out here, the reason I'm using this account is to underscore this one fact, which is that in the earliest accounts, Joseph Smith expects to get the plates when he goes to the hill every time. Okay, he expects to get it in 1823. It doesn't happen because he screwed something up. So now he's going to have to come back the following year, because it can't be next week or next month. It's got to be a year, which signals the importance of the date, as well as the fact that Joseph has a certain amount of time he has to encompass and cover in his narrative when he's working on the Book of Mormon, which he's going to dictate in 1829. Anyway, but
you were right. You were right, RFM. It does say, while he was this is in the 1838 account, while he was conversing with me about the plates, the vision was open to my mind that I could see the place where the plates were deposited. You're right. Okay.
You can't say that enough, believe me. You want to say it again?
No.
Okay. And can you continue reading here, Bill? Once again, this is Joseph Knight Sr. recounting what Joseph Smith told him. They're very close, very, very close. And Joseph Knight's very faithful. And this is an early account.
But before September came, his oldest brother died. Then he disappointed.
I think he was disappointed.
Okay. Then he was disappointed and did not know what to do. But when the 22nd day of September came, he went to the place, and the personage appeared and told him he could not have it now. But the 22nd day of September next, he might have the book if he brought with him the right person. Joseph says, "Who is the right person?" The answer was, "You will know." Then he looked in his glass, and he found it was Emma Hale, daughter of old Mr. Hale of Pennsylvania, a girl that he had seen before, for he had been down there before with me.
Okay. So once again, I don't think it could be really any clearer that Joseph Smith expects to get the gold plates every time he goes to the hill, and he keeps getting disappointed. The reason this is interesting to me, and the reason I bring it up, is because of something that Joseph Smith writes in his 1838 account, which appears to contradict this. And we'll get to this here in a second. And Kolby, can you read this, since you were just recently looking at this account? This is verse 53 of the Joseph Smith history in the Pearl of Great Price.
So Joseph says in 1838, I made an attempt to take them out, meaning the plates, but was forbidden by the messenger, and was again informed that the time for bringing them forth had not yet arrived, neither would it until 4 years from that time. But he told me that I should come to that place precisely in 1 year from that time, and that he would there meet with me, and that I should continue to do so until the time should come for obtaining the plates. Yeah, so we're seeing, this is actually kind of what we were talking about with that criterion of embarrassment idea. Here we see Joseph Smith smoothing over the rough edges and making it as if Moroni had said from the very beginning that he was never going to get the plates until 1827. Instead, those earlier accounts, like you said, RFM, they show that he expected to get the plates every year and is continually disappointed. And in 1838, he smooths that all over.
Yes. Any thoughts from you, Bill or Randy, about this? I think this is significant, and this is something that I saw, and so I'm excited by it. I'm not saying somebody else hasn't seen it before, but it was new to me.
I'm in my head trying to figure out why he feels the need to change the story. Again, going back to like the 116 pages of Lehi, there are certain things Smith is saying so as to shield himself from the criticism that's going to hit him in that story if those 116 pages show back up again. So there's something going on here where he's embarrassed by the fact that he told people he was going to get the plates the next year and the next year and the next year. And later on, he does not want to have people question him about that. So now it's a narrative where I was always going to get it 4 or 5 years from now. And I just had to wait and come back each year and be prepared. And I don't know that I've landed on anything yet. I'm thinking about this in real time, but he is shielding himself from some criticism that would feel embarrassing to him.
What about just Alvin's death and then the rumor about like the grave digging, grave robbing of Alvin that was significant enough that Joseph Sr. needed to publicize something in the local paper about it? Because that earliest account, right, from the one that we just read from Joseph Knight talks about Alvin being the selected person. Maybe that's the embarrassment he's trying to avoid. I don't know. Or it could be as simple as just, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for an angel of God to tell you to bring somebody that's going to die within a few months of them telling you that that's going to be the person that you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's another angle to that too, which is, again, this first vision narrative is put into, sorry if I bumped the mic, the first vision narrative is put into the voice of Moroni in the earlier stories. Joseph is embarrassed by the treasure digging narrative. Again, so many of those stories are couched with treasure digging details. The fact that he does have to bring Alvin with him and then Samuel Lawrence and then Emma, it seems to me that putting the message, at least in part, in the voice of Jesus allows him to shift what people are seeing and how he's going to be criticized by those other treasure digging associates. He gets to take it away from Moroni, who they could question, and they say the plates belong to them too. They're in this treasure digging contract with Joseph Smith Sr. He gets to remove the responsibility to share in any of this if it deals with Moroni only, and he gets to put it into a more religious narrative and make it more Christ-centered, and you can't make it any more Christ-centered than Jesus Christ himself. So there seems to be some of that tied to this as well.
Yes, you know what the legal defense is he's using to violate the terms of the contract he had with the other money diggers? The defense is called act of God. Randy, did you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, the way I kind of see this is this this kind of smacks of a theme I've heard before with all of Joseph Smith's treasure digs, where they go out, they're so close, so close, you know, that you can hear the shovel hit the treasure, and then it's, oh shucks, you know, we missed it, we got to come back, or we got to do this. And what you see here is this kind of a continuation of that narrative of which Joseph Smith is so well acclimated, of just, oh, well, I was so close, and dang it. You know, who knows why he was motivated to do that? Maybe it was because of the contracts that were mentioned, because there were other treasure diggers that would have come after him had he announced he finally got it. Maybe he's trying to get rid of them. Who knows? But it just strikes me that this is very parallel, very similar to these treasure dig narratives.
Very good. Thank you. I'm going to put up here the slide with some of my thoughts about it. In the 1838 account, Joseph has Moroni tell him at the outset he won't be getting the plates for 4 years. By so doing, Joseph signals, one, that he recognizes it seems fishy for him to keep going back to the hill expecting to get the plates, but coming home empty-handed because of some unfulfilled condition. By the way, his imagination doesn't provide stories for every time he would have had to go to the hill. It's really just the first couple times. And the rest of them are sort of in silence, but we sort of understand they took the same general outline. And two, Joseph rewrites history to give Moroni the foreknowledge an angel of God should have. When it's just a treasure guardian, you know, I mean, they can't tell the future. They're not associated with an omniscient being, but Moroni should know. And so now in the 1838 account, it's rewritten so that he does know it won't be until 4 years that Joseph Smith gets the plates, Bill.
Moroni has foreknowledge in this account, but he has the opposite. He has a blind spot. He doesn't know Alvin's going to die. So at least in part, this is a way to, as you point out, Kolby, to smooth over the needing Alvin. And the other thing I think of too is, again, Dan Vogel has suggested that those 4 years could have been spent fabricating the plates, and that whatever it was took much longer than he thought it was going to take. He thought he could that 1 year later come back and have the plates, and he doesn't. This is also a way to distract people from asking if those 4 years could have been used. In other words, if Moroni tells you on the front end, I'll see you in 4 years to actually get the plates, but come visit me, then there isn't like, oh, I'm trying to make the plates and I failed and I got to kick the can down the street and come. It sort of gets away from people thinking about that part of the story. So he may be covering up, or at least has the ability to cover up, a couple of uncomfortable facets of his narrative by doing this.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I think this may be a pretty good example of Joseph Smith rewriting history and having Moroni say things in 1823 that Moroni would not have said in 1823. Okay, so issue number 3, this is the second example. This is some other research I stumbled upon. A second example of Joseph Smith rewriting history in his 1838 account of Moroni's visit, ? Well, this is an article that I found in Dialogue. It's written by Mark D. Thomas. You may have heard of that name. He is a longtime Mormon, faithful Mormon scholar. He did an article. It was titled Form Criticism of Joseph Smith's 1823 Vision of the Angel Moroni. And he comes up with one main example that he wants to talk about where he thinks that Joseph Smith is doing this. Before that, I want to give you Mark D. Thomas a little bit about him. He's a former scripture studies editor of Dialogue and a contributor to a forthcoming book entitled The Mormon Annotated Isaiah. He sounds pretty faithful, pretty Mormon, pretty scholarly. And he is. And here I found, this was a presentation that he was giving. It was video. It was 2021 at the Joseph Smith Papers conference. And it says a little bit more about him in that summary. I don't know that I need to go into it that much. But this guy is, he's knowledgeable, but he's also faithful. So if anything, he has a bias the other way. But he, as a scholar, tries to overcome that, sometimes with more success than others. But I think here he was pretty successful. The 1838 history of Moroni's visit has there in verse 38. Let me see here. Kolby, could you read that? I think we all remember this, but this is the Pearl of Great Price, and this is what Joseph Smith is having Moroni say when he appears to him in 1823.
And this is the only version where he has this quote.
Yes.
Okay. And again, he quoted the 5th verse, thus, "Behold, I will reveal unto you the priesthood by the hand of Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord."
Right. And that's Malachi chapter 4, verse 5. So this is the only time when Joseph Smith, or anybody to my knowledge, has Moroni talking about Elijah and the priesthood being restored through Elijah. Okay.
There is that other version where he talks about Elias. Get it?
There is. There is. See, there's so many different things. It's hard to get focused. This is one of the reasons why I think it's so hard for me to have finally focused on Moroni's visit, because there's so many interesting, other things going on that can distract my attention if I'm not careful. But this is what Mark D. Thomas does, okay? First off, I want to say that I recommend reading his paper. I'm going to put it up here again so you can see it, okay? If you read this paper, what you're going to find out is he's going to really zero in on this idea about the priesthood. And the idea about the priesthood being restored through Elijah specifically. So what he does, he goes through a very lengthy analysis. And the main point that he comes to that's important for this, I don't want to repeat the whole analysis. This is already long enough, but there's the paper for you. Is that prior to 1834, there was never any connection between Elijah and a restoration of the priesthood. Elijah was mentioned, but in connection with other things, never with restoring priesthood until 1834. And he's very hard and fast on that. And you can tell by the way he puts this in what he writes here. And I tell you what, if we can get I don't even know. Kolby, can you read this? This is what Mark D. Thomas is writing about this issue. This is more in the conclusion part.
Sure. Just beginning at the beginning, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Joseph Smith claimed in 1838, 1839 that these were the words of the angel in 1823. Here the angel tells the prophet that Elijah will restore the priesthood, but this is not possible since the wording reflects an understanding that appeared only in the second period, post
Can we hang on just a
1834.
second there, Kolby?
Yes.
But this is not possible. That's why I underlined it, right? But this is not possible. He says, okay, Moroni could not have been talking about Elijah and the priesthood in 1823.
Mhm.
All right. It's just a very strong statement from a faithful scholar.
Right. But his reason for that he gives is the wording reflects an understanding that appeared only in the second period, post 1834,
Yes.
in which the coming of Elijah was understood in Mormon literature and scripture as a restoration of priesthood. It is highly improbable, inconceivable in my mind.
You think he knows what that word means?
I think he does. That Joseph Smith's quote of Moroni in his 1838, 1839 history and the pearl of great price could have been uttered before 1834. The words of the angel in Joseph Smith's 1838 and 1839 history, and therefore in the pearl of great price, are anachronistic, meaning that they're outside of time, right? That's what he's talking about. In other words, in 1838, 1839, Joseph Smith placed new words in the mouth of the angel, not to relate history, but to address the theological concerns of Mormonism in 1838. But, Brother Thomas should know that Joseph Smith didn't just do this to the angel, he also did it to Jesus Christ. So at least he's consistent on that. The wording of Moroni seems to be a message to the 1838 audience that God would avenge the wrongs done to them in Missouri and that God was on their side because he had revealed the power of Elijah, perhaps as a priesthood power to seal the heavens against Mormonism's enemy, as the prophecy foretold. I really like this. I really like the analysis here because it's actually very similar to what you and I were talking about a little bit yesterday, RFM on the phone. Is Joseph Smith did this constantly. Like he's changing these narratives, including the stories of how Mormonism came to be when, like in response to the contemporary needs of both him and the church members generally, right? And I'll just give the quick example you and I were talking about. When Joseph Smith in the King Follett Discourse uses the phrase infants on thrones, he is telling those grieving mothers who had lost children in these persecutions of the early Mormons exactly what they want to hear. And I think this connects with like your view of Joseph Smith, Randy, better than mine, which is that Joseph Smith constantly did this. He constantly told people, like most con men do, exactly what they want to hear, because turns out when you tell people what they want to hear, that's a pretty solid way to increase their confidence in you and to continue to build a following.
There is a famous expression by, I think it's Emerson, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Now, that is frequently misquoted to leave out the foolish part and just say consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. Well, regardless, consistency was something that Joseph Smith really didn't concern himself about. And that's very helpful to me to understand a little bit more about him, because for me, and I think for most people, consistency is really important. That we want to tell the same story the same way twice to make it, consistent, right? But Joseph Smith doesn't seem to have cared about consistency. Or if he does, he's not really good at it. So let me see if there's anything else that Mark Thomas wrote here. Yes, he did. Hey, Randy, could you read this part of what he wrote?
Sure. The evidence of anachronism supports the thesis of Walters and Marquette that the details are what I'm sorry, what is it?
I'm sorry, it's Wesley Walters and is it Michael? It's Michael Marquardt, right? I've met him before. He's still around. And because they had this theory as well. So he's saying that his observation here about the anachronism supports their theories.
Okay. That the details of the 1823 vision evolved based on changing theological concerns. There are other anachronistic details in the 1838-39 narrative of the 1823 vision. But this is the strongest evidence and is in itself reveals the evolutionary nature of the story. That's a very charitable way to put it. It is evolving, all right.
He doesn't go into what any of those other anachronisms are that he alleges here. He focuses on this one. He doesn't mention the other one that I found, and I don't know if that's included in his list because the one I found seems pretty conclusive too. So here are some thoughts that I wrote down. In 1838, Joseph Smith added to what the angel said in 1823 by adding the bit about it being the plan from the beginning that Joseph would come to the hill over 4 years. Okay. I'm not sure I wrote that down as well. That's what we're talking about before, right? The first one, the one I discovered. Number 2, 1838, Joseph Smith added to what the angel said in 1823 about Elijah restoring the priesthood. So that's my discovery, and then Mark Thomas's discovery. And then 3, Mark Thomas says there are other anachronistic details in the 1838 version without mentioning what they are. So that's more of a synopsis kind of slide. Issue number 4, what about all the Bible passages the angel quotes in the 1838 history? I mean, he's kind of famous for that, right? He quotes from Malachi chapter 4, and then he quotes from something else. And if we've read it, we're familiar with that, I think. But this is continuing with Mark Thomas's article, where he has this to say about the whole issue about whether the angel ever quoted any Bible passages at all. Now, I believe that as a believer, he presents at least as believing that the angel appeared. He's trying to figure things out. But there doesn't seem to be any Bible passages associated with the angel in the beginning, leading him to this conclusion. Could you read this, Bill?
So we must ask the question, is it possible that the original story and vision had no scriptural citations? Are all the citations anachronistic and later additions? We have nothing prior to Oliver Cowdery's statement in the Messenger and Advocate and the Robert Matthews interview, both in 1835, that Malachi was quoted in the vision. Early accounts do not mention the scriptures, but they also do not give much detail. So we are justified in questioning whether the original tale contained citation of scripture or the citation of Malachi more specifically.
That's an interesting thought, isn't it? Coming from a faithful Mormon scholar. Any thoughts about that from anyone before we proceed?
Seems unusually honest.
It is. Now, I will tell you that I think he really distinguishes himself in these parts. There are other places in the article where I think he bends over backwards to make unreasonable conclusions in favor of Joseph Smith. I think one of his arguments is that he thinks it's more likely that the first vision actually did happen, or at least some kind of first vision with Joseph Smith, because a lot of people were receiving similar kinds of supernatural events in their lives at the same time. So he thinks that because of that, it's more likely that Joseph Smith actually did too. I'm not sure that I follow that reasoning as well as I follow this.
Well, my understanding of the first vision is that Joseph Smith started the church in 1830, and a couple years later, I don't know exactly when, one of the members of the congregation had a vision of God and Jesus, or Jesus at least, and he decided, well, not to be outdone, I'll have a vision, and backdate it, way back. So who knows?
I see a larger pattern. Again, 1832 tells us an event that happened in 1820. There are other David Whitmer saying like the priesthood thing didn't happen, like that was a late telling of an earlier event. And here you have another instance of Joseph going, I'd like to place something way back there. Let me do it now. And how many times does it have to happen? I mean, again, I think there's an episode to be done to go over how many times in Mormonism does Joseph Smith backdate something that seems to the documentary history to be out of place, that more likely if we're just not using faith but using logic, doesn't seem to have happened when Smith said it did. And those were 3 quick examples, and I can just about assure you there are more. If that pattern shows up, at what point is it showing up enough that you begin to go like, oh, So what Smith does is constantly tell us that things happened prior to the moment he tells us, and they really didn't happen.
Yeah, he's just backdating the evidence. That's why, quite honestly, as we're going through this, I've got a guy in my office that does the graphics, the courtroom exhibits. I think I'm going to build a timeline. If nobody else is interested, at least it will help me, but happy to share it. But it's going to show all these things that supposedly happened in 1820, et cetera, and then how they were later explained way after the church was even organized, because I think those timelines, they help juries really kind of get what's going on. And I think in this particular case, this is really particularly interesting or relevant.
Section 132 is another example. There's word that he received it earlier, as early as da-da-da.
Yeah.
And the reality is that it almost certainly 132 as we know it came when 132 came.
Yeah.
Another famous example, I think it's from the King Follett Discourse. It might be from the Sermon at the Grove, where he's probably Sermon at the Grove, subsequent to this King Follett Discourse, where he's talking about the separateness of the beings in the Godhead, the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, separate beings. And he then says, I have always taught that they were separate beings for the past 14 years, when that is demonstrably not true.
Lectures on faith notwithstanding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. And that was only 9 years before he was making the statement. But he wants to go back to the very beginning and say, this new teaching that I'm giving you right now, which is very radical in the Christian world, though it's what we've sort of come to accept in Mormonism, I've been teaching this all along.
If we zoom out even farther, though, that really is Joseph Smith's entire shtick. Like, if you think about what the correlated Mormon narrative is it's the same thing, but just as applied to Christianity. Like, you believe that Adam and Eve, when they're exiled from the garden, literally had the same type or some analog of garments that are worn by people today. You think that the temple practices that Jesus would have taken place in, or at least had been in his milieu, are the same temple practices that Mormons do today. This is literally just what Joseph Smith does all of the time, is he invents new narratives, right? He takes this religious pastiche and then he applies it back through history, whether it's his own history or millennia before. That's just what he does, right? When he comes to a new idea, he takes it and makes it a through line all throughout all of religious history.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thank you. I was just trying to look that up while you were talking, but yeah, I have always declared God to be a distinct personage, Jesus Christ a separate and distinct personage from God the Father, and that the Holy Ghost was a distinct personage and a spirit.
Which is crazy, because even the Book of Mormon doesn't teach that version. Abinadi very clearly teaches that they are the same God, that the Father and the Son are the same.
Oh, the Book of Mormon, I talked to Sandra Tanner at length about this. The Book of Mormon is just Protestant Christianity. Mm-hmm. There is nothing Mormon about the Book of Mormon. The whole Trinity thing, the whole plan of salvation, the temple work, make a long list. It's not in the Book of Mormon.
Good point. Thank you. Now, talking about those quotes, from the Bible, here's an interesting aside. How many passages from the Bible does Moroni quote in the 1838 account? Well, according to this, and this is from an article from the Ensign, August 1990, titled Moroni's Message to Joseph Smith. It was written by Kent P. Jackson, by the way. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 passages. See, there's Malachi 3, Malachi 4, Isaiah 11, Acts 3, and Joel 2. And I think that they're kind of delineated as being referenced from those books in the 1838 account. But there are those 5 that are quoted by Moroni in the 1838 account. So in Ulrich Cowdery's Messenger and Advocate letter from 1835, when he's talking about the angel showing up and talking to Joseph Smith. Now, we know he goes on a lot longer than Joseph Smith does, just word-wise. But here's 4 passages of scripture that he has Moroni quoting. There's 1 Corinthians 1, Isaiah 29, a different passage, and Isaiah 29:11. So those are 3 different places that are close in Isaiah 29. Very important chapter for the restoration. But that's not all. It's not only those 4. It's also all of these. This chart
Wow.
continues.
I guess I'm so struck by the fact that we talked about this when we started looking at the earliest account. And what did we say? We said that we see this weird mix of Joseph Smith taking disparate scriptures, melding them together into some type of new narrative that also involves him in the first person. And what do we see, according to Kent Jackson, who's a huge fan of me, by the way?
Tell us about that. But finish your thought first. Then I want to hear about you and Kent.
We see this exact same thing. Like, we see this exact same thing, but only now it's Moroni. I'm putting that in air quotes. Moroni that's doing the same thing that we can demonstrate that Joseph Smith does in his 1830 letters to the Colesville Saints in the 1832 history. We are seeing a very consistent theme, regardless of who it's attributed to by Joseph Smith. Ken Jackson made some nasty comments about me on some episode that I had made. And then when I emailed him directly asking if he would talk about that, he did not respond. He is not a big fan of a former mentor of mine, Tom Wayment. He's one of the people that, after Wayment had published his research on the Adam Clark's Bible commentary, Jackson is the one that was assigned, I'll say, assigned to do the hatchet job on Wayment's research. And so I'm just guessing that it's attributable to that.
Very good.
I just chuckled.
And I'll say that since this isn't, thank you for sharing that at my request. Because this is Oliver Cowdery writing this, either he's getting this directly from Joseph Smith, and we're seeing once again Joseph Smith's ability to do this, or Oliver Cowdery is doing it himself, which would lead us to the conclusion that this ability was not that rare in Joseph Smith's day because people were familiar with the Bible.
And to that point of Joseph Smith's familiarity with the Bible, there are apologists who want to say he wasn't familiar with it until after the church started, right? That he just had like this cursory familiarity with the Bible. His 1838 first vision account and the account of the angel Moroni completely belies that all on its own, because when Moroni is capturing or recounting the verses from Malachi, he slightly changes them, right? And in the 1838 account, Joseph Smith recognizes like, oh, he did it with slight variation. He changed this word to this and this word to this. You're not able to do that unless you are very familiar and conversant with the Bible.
This is an excellent point. It's one of the things that occurred to me very early on in my membership in the church when I was trying to learn the Bible. Never read the Bible. So I'm starting pretty much from scratch. And as an apologist, I began to learn not only do I have to know what the Bible says in order to respond to people, I also have to know it well enough to know what it does not say. Because people make representations about what the Bible say all the time, and it helps if you know whether that representation is correct. But you're right, he would have had to have known, according to his own presentation of the evidence, he would have had to have known Malachi that well, at least that one verse that well, to know that Moroni is adding a word to it when he's reciting it to him. Yes. Either that or it sort of gives the lie to the whole story. I don't know. Here's a slide. The number of verses quoted by the angel in the 1838 history, Pearl of Great Price, there's 5 passages. In the 1835 Oliver Cowdery letter, there are 30 passages identified by Kent P. Jackson. Thanks, Kent, for that work.
I'm waiting for a response, Kent.
Yes, waiting for a response. Why does Oliver Cowdery, this is the question. I don't know that I have an answer. Why does Oliver Cowdery have the angel quoting 30 Bible verses in 1835 account, whereas Joseph Smith in 1838 has the angel quoting only 5? I don't know, and I don't mean to say that Joseph Smith saying it was only these 5 and no more, because no, he says this is some of the stuff he talked about. So maybe Oliver Cowdery got the other 25 right. But it is a strange dichotomy. Any thoughts from you 3 gentlemen about this? Hearing no objection, I'll continue. Issue number 5. Remember, there's 6. So this is the second to last, penultimate. Yes, Bill.
Well, I was hoping you guys were all going to talk so I'd have time to do this, but I was going to copy and paste that 1832 history, which I think, Kolby, you had said you had done this to some extent, but taking that 1832 history, put it into AI and ask it to pick out how many Bible verses is Smith using outside of the vision itself, where an angel is the one talking, but where Smith is relaying his experience. How many Bible verses is he inserting into his narrative? because we noted at the beginning that there were at least a handful. That would be interesting to me, that would be Joseph Smith's pattern of behavior, which finds its way in the voice of Moroni or in the voice of Jesus, but which would be demonstrated to be first showing up as Smith talking about his own life experience and doing it. Maybe all of those are just Joseph Smith.
I still have that window open, so I've got it running that analysis right now, Bill. The one thing I'll say is I did that exact analysis on Joseph Smith's 2 letters to the Colesville Saints in 1830, looking at scriptural quotations of, I think I said it at like 5 words or more. And one of the things that I was blown away by, and granted, Joseph Smith, as we've already talked about, never ended a sentence in his life except for one. And so he's constantly doing these run-on sentences.
Oh Lord, my God. Was that the sentence that he ended?
That was the joke. I was going to let people figure it out if they knew. But in one sentence, in one of those Colesville letters, Bill, he literally has 10 different scriptural quotations or references in one sentence. That's amazing ability to work these scriptural narratives together. So that was me trying to stall while it ran the analysis. And it looks like there are about 17 different clear biblical passages or references in the 1832 First Vision portion. It's, if you include looser biblical echoes or stock scriptural phrases, it can get up to 30. So I'd have to run further analysis on separating it out from the things that are attributed to the angel or to God or Jesus himself. But it's not an insignificant number, because there's no way all 17 of those are falling within just the passages from the angel or from Jesus.
Yeah, I think we do ourselves a disservice when we think that the way we might talk about the Bible is the same way that Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery and even Moroni would have talked about the Bible, because that is like the lingua franca of the day. These are the expressions. This forms the basis for communication between people, because they know the Bible that well. They don't have TV, they don't have movies, they don't have radio. This is the second great awakening. And everybody is eating, sleeping, and breathing the Bible 7 days a week.
Children were literally taught to read using the Bible in this day and age. Like, a lot of people don't recognize that, because today we have a clear separation of church and state. It wasn't so in these days. Like that incorporation doctrine didn't apply until after Reconstruction era, after the Civil War, and didn't apply to states, I mean. And so it was very common to be taught to read using the Bible in Joseph Smith's day and age.
At school.
At public school. Yes.
Right. And there's a reason Maryland was called Maryland. But we don't have to get into that, because it was Catholic. And they have a thing about Mary. There's something about Mary those Catholics say. Issue number 5. Why is the angel not given a name until the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants? Now, once again, I don't have an answer, but I think it's an interesting question. Here it is, by the way. There's section 27. And you remember, this is the one that adds Peter, James, and John. There's a huge passage that gets added to this between its appearance in the 1833 Book of Commandments and the same revelation 2 years later in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, where it appears as section 27. And we have it today. This part at the beginning, that's just the what do you call it? The introductory paragraph. But here's the actual verse in verse 5. Can you read that, Randy?
Sure. Behold, this is wisdom in me, wherefore marvel not, for the hour cometh that I will drink of the fruit of the vine with you on the earth, and with Moroni, whom I have sent unto you to reveal the Book of Mormon, containing the fullness of my everlasting gospel, of whom I have committed the keys of the record of the stick of Ephraim.
So as far as I know, and I think that this is correct, Dan Vogel, you correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody, but I'm pretty dang sure this is the first time that the name Moroni appears as the name of the angel who appears to Joseph Smith to give him the plates. And I think within the context, it's pretty clear that this is identifying the angel who revealed the Book of Mormon to him. I'm not sure there's a lot of wiggle room on it being somebody else. What do you think, Kolby?
Remind me of the year this is given. Originally.
1835. So in 1833, this revelation appears, but it doesn't have Peter, James, and John in it, and it doesn't have Moroni in it. This is all added between 1833 and 1835 when it's republished in the Doctrine and Covenants.
Okay.
Is that significant to you?
Yes, but not in a way that I can fully wrap my head around yet. I would want to think through why we're seeing this all added in 1835.
Okay, very good. So here are some thoughts of mine. Number one, Peter, James, and John appeared to Joseph Smith in 1829. At least that's how the story came to be told. But their names and the story itself don't appear until 1835 in this same section. Number two, Moroni appeared to Joseph Smith in 1823, but his name doesn't appear until 1835. Peter, James, and John unnamed for 6 years. Moroni unnamed for 14 years. Peter, James, and John are a little bit different because the entire incident itself doesn't appear until 6 years after it's supposed to. Moroni, the angel appearing, has been going on for a long time, but he doesn't get a name until 14 years after he appeared. Kolby, what are you thinking?
I do think it's clicked in my head why I'm viewing it as significant, and it's seeing it all laid out like this. One of the things that's so interesting about Joseph Smith to me is the way that he needs to ground these religious narratives in like naturalistic theories. And what I mean by that is like his version of God is like an actual man, right? Like a resurrected man with actual flesh and bone and an actual, the normal biological systems. I'll just say it that way. And I think one of the things I'm struck by is we're seeing the same tendency in him to hook these characters or these messengers. Instead of them just being generic angels, it's not just generic angels. It's Peter, James, and John. It's like the three most important people. And I'm wondering if at that time when he's making the angel go from being just an angel to Moroni, he's recognizing the need to fix these messengers at actual characters that his audience would understand. I'm guessing that's what I'm seeing the significance as.
Yeah, again, if you go prior to the first naming of Moroni and you deal with all the accounts of people, now they might be late remembrances, but they're people that associated with Smith earlier than the naming of Moroni, and those descriptions, including the Joseph Knight, there's an acknowledgement that so many of those narratives are dealing with treasure digging ideas. I don't think that it seems apparent to me that yes, Kolby, Joseph is taking an angel or a spirit that is in one culture known very differently to all the people around him, and now is putting him in a different context. And so by naming him Moroni, and now you've got the religious narrative of the Book of Mormon, you get to shift who that guardian spirit was into something completely different.
And it makes it much more important, right? So when Joseph Smith receives Doctrine and Covenants 93, which is all about light and truth and the eternal nature of truth and God, the relationship God has to truth, it's not enough that it's just a vision of Joseph Smith or a revelation of Joseph Smith. He says that it's something that was originally given to John, the beloved. And one of the ironies, and you talked about this once with David Bacavoy, RFM, how that those ideas could be attributable to a lot of early Christian church history figures, but definitely not John, because John is the one that would not adopt the view in Doctrine and Covenants 93 that Jesus grew from grace to grace. Instead, in John's gospel, we get that Jesus was God before the world even existed. And so if you had to pick one apostle that would not espouse the views in Doctrine and Covenants 93, ironically, Joseph Smith picked the one that would be that would find those ideas the most difficult to accept. But I guess what I'm seeing is this trend to Joseph Smith of hooking things in to what his audience already believes. It's not as impressive for Joseph Smith to just receive a messenger. It's more impressive that it's a messenger from the Book of Mormon, from these actual peoples. That's where the way I'm seeing these things connect.
Because in Joseph Smith's mind, it would quite naturally be one of those people from the Book of Mormon who would be the guardian of the place.
Right. And as another example, when Joseph Smith is confronted in 1835 by Michael Chandler with the papyrus, it's not enough for him to be like, oh, I found this papyrus And what do you know? It just so happens to be a papyrus attributable to Abraham. And oh, what do you know? The other one is attributable to Joseph, who was sold into Egypt. So we see this trend in Joseph Smith constantly, where he's like, he is bolstering his own authority claims by linking them to figures in the Bible or in the Book of Mormon.
But he seems to sense that I'm making this grand claim that we just so happen to find papyri. That's the Book of Abraham in the Book of Joseph, that he adds another narrative in and says, oh, and there's this other papyri that's about this Princess Catamin, which has nothing to do with anything religious. So, I'm not going to worry about that one necessarily, but isn't it cool we got these other two?
Yeah, my recollection is, even though it was never fully developed, this Princess Catamin story and everything, was that the idea was that he was developing this lineal, this family and their lineage in Egypt to talk about how it was that they had like Abraham's account or something like that. So he's thinking that far ahead. But yeah, everything is linking up to somebody else. It's very much the whole pseudepigrapha idea of taking your ideas and then linking it to a famous person that everybody agrees is a prophet to give them added weight and authority. Your thoughts, Randy?
Just Joseph Smith, in my mind, you tell a big enough lie, people will believe it, or at least a segment of people will believe it. And he went for the biggest lies. Like you say, what are the odds? Gee, Book of Abraham, Book of Joseph. I mean, what are the odds of that showing up in Kirtland, Ohio? Those are just whoppers.
Zelf.
Yeah.
Zelf and Onondagas.
Yes. Onondagas, that was actually the name of, what was it? The Egyptian god Min. Never mind. That's just too obscure. I'm not even going to follow that up. So here is, wait a second. This is you. You put this on.
I was just going to say it's to the point where even the churches, those who are like, I'm going to be in the church to my dying breath, I'm going to always position things from a faithful point of view. Richard Bushman acknowledges that so much of what Joseph Smith did looks clearly like pseudepigrapha. So I just want to note, like, even the faithful scholars are struggling to reconcile this in a way that matches up with the church's, I'll say, dominant narrative.
I'll also point out, I'm so sorry. I'll also point out that strain of apologetics, if you'll put that back up for a second, Bill. So Bushman is trying to implicitly excuse what Joseph Smith is doing by producing pseudepigrapha, by saying that it bears resemblance to this large corpus of scriptures and that they came in the form of writings in another person's name. If you don't believe in any of those scriptures, this apologetic doesn't move the needle for you at all, right? It's just like, oh, okay. Well, the fact that other people have done this throughout history and falsely attributed religious narratives to the wrong person, I don't care that Joseph Smith is hooking into a tradition of basically justified fraud. I don't know. It's just such a weird apologetic to me.
Well, this proves that Joseph Smith was a true prophet because he was engaging in fraudulent pseudepigraphic representations the same way that they used to in the Bible.
Right.
Like with the Pauline epistles that are alleged to be written by Paul, but pretty much all the scholars agree were not written by Paul. Okay. Well, I hope we're strengthening testimonies today. Thank you for that, Bill. Issue number 6. This is the final issue. And before I get to it, I want to say something. I want to say thank you to all of you guys for being here and joining me on this Saturday. I appreciate it. We're coming to a close. It's 3 hours now, but you guys have been peaches and hung in here the whole thing. I also want to say to everybody, thank you for watching Radio Free Mormon. And thank you for all those of you who have donated to the show. Your donations keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. If you haven't done so yet, would you please go to radiofreemormon.org, make a donation today, click that donation button, and your donations will continue this work of going forth and these wonderful, wonderful deep dives with incredible panel discussions by these great guys.
Didn't you say that the next donation was going to be used to buy you a flannel shirt so you can dress like a respectable person, RFM?
I have flannel shirts. I don't wear them because people point and laugh. People come up to me and they say, "Hey, Kolby, how you doing?" That's
we have
problem.
very different experiences with flannel, apparently. Okay.
Yes, we do. We do. Flannel's nice, but I like silk better. All right. So issue number 6. After Moroni is named in 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, right? Why is it that just 3 years later, the angel is called Nephi in the 1838 church history? Okay, that's the question. So here we have it. This, of course, I got from the internet, where in the 1838, the original document, this is the 1838 history, folks. He called me by name and said unto me that he was a messenger sent from the presence of God to me, and that his name was, drum roll please, not Moroni, Nephi. And there you have it above the transcription. I enlarged it over there on the right so you can see it was Nephi, and they make it very nice and ornate. And then they put an asterisk next to it, and above it, somebody at some point later wrote the word Moroni. Sometime later, this was seen to be a mistake, and it was changed to Moroni, and that's the way it reads in your 1838 account in your Pearl of Great Price today. And these are the two passages put side by side. Here's the transcription on the left of the original, the way it was written, that his name was his name was Nephi, and then after he got changed, and as we have it today, and that his name was Moroni. So here's my thoughts about this. Then I want to hear your thoughts. If the angel had been called Moroni multiple times prior to 1838, which he wasn't, but if he had been, it would be easier to see the use of the word Nephi in 1838 as a simple mistaken name. It may just be that anyway, but I'm just saying if it had been called Nephi a number of times before, or even once before, okay, it would be, if it had been called Moroni several times before, then Nephi would look like, okay, it was a brain fart. But it appears the only time prior to that the name Moroni was used was in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, section 27. So that's once. It looks like there's only one time that Moroni is the name given to the angel, and that's where it is, and that's in 1835. And then 3 years later, in 1838, it's Nephi. So to me, it looks less like a mistake in not Doctrine and Covenants, but in the church history. It looks less like a mistake there to have it Nephi and more like a historical development in progress. What do you think about that? Let's start with Randy.
My personal take on the whole thing, really to sum it up, is that things with Joseph Smith from 1820, certainly to well after 1830, where he formed this new church, was just kind of here, there, and everywhere. And he didn't really keep track of his narrative very well. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't, but he's just making up stuff as he goes along. I think, frankly, after 1830, starting the church with 6 people, he was frankly surprised that people were really buying into this Book of Mormon thing. It was obviously getting bigger. And then finally in 1838, he sat down and said, I got to clean all this up. I got to come out with a slick, polished narrative based upon, what would that be, 18 years of history that's, again, here, there, and everywhere. And that's what he did in 1838. But going back over the timeline, back to 1820, and it really goes before that, in my mind, in the Dartmouth era, it was a mess. And he just, 1838 was his cleanup year.
Thank you. Bill.
Yeah, let me put up on the screen here just to give, it's one thing to make the mistake. It's another thing for the mistake to keep getting reused over and over again without anyone going like, hey, wait a minute, that shouldn't be Nephi. So as you pointed out, the 1838 history, by the way, just a acknowledgement going out to, this is on mormonhandbook.com. This is their images, their URL site. So 1838 history, there's the mistake you talked about. You had the original document image up on the screen. After that, it shows up again in, not there, that's the Elders Journal, and it's right there, by the way. I don't know what the date is on that, 1838, July. But in 1842, Times and Seasons, Volume 3, number 12, it's just a repeat of the 1838 quote. So it's possible that it's an original mistake. Brain fart, as you point out, gets carried over to the Times and Seasons. Then it shows up again.
Can you hang on just a second here, Bill? Because I think that's really significant. And So the 1838, it's called 1838-39, but the 1838 history, the church history, that's 1838. It is not published until 1842, which is why it's kind of confusing with the Wentworth letter. But it's a separate document. So it's not published until 1842. And when it's published in 1842, it says Nephi.
It repeats.
So we would then maybe, I think we would presume that the Moroni and the asterisk was not added until after 1842 at some point.
Yeah. And then it shows up again, April 15th, Times and Seasons article. And I think it's the exact same quote. He called me by name. So they're just repeating it. So now it's the third time. Millennial Star, volume 3, number 4, page 53. And then again, this time different in the editorial remarks, Millennial Star, volume 3, number 4. Again, when we read the history of our beloved brother Joseph Smith and of the glorious ministry and message of the angel Nephi. Then again, 1851. Now it's the same quote again, so it's made into a mistake. I think this is the fourth time now, plus the editorial remarks. So fifth time generally, fourth time exact duplication of the mistake.
This is going to be, I think it's when Frederick G. Williams is over in England and he wants to put together the volume of materials for Latter-day Saints recently baptized to read. That'll be faith promoting. And he includes the first vision account, like we have it in the Pearl of Great Price today. That's where it originally came from. And even in 1851, he's including the original manuscript name of Nephi. And
then in 1853, when Lucy Mack Smith writes her autobiographical or her biographical sketches of Joseph Smith and the progenitors, she does the same thing.
No, she doesn't. She does. I'm so sorry. What happened was she wrote hers in 1845. She doesn't mention any name. This is when the church / Brigham Young added Joseph Smith's account to her story to provide for this. And it includes the wrong name of Nephi from the 1838 account.
Which isn't this
going on here?
Isn't this this is a different book though, isn't it? Biographical sketches of Joseph Smith. Isn't that a different book?
That's the same one. That's the one she wrote about her son. So I think that's the addition the church made, but it would still indicate that the church was using Nephi in 1853.
Yeah. And then you combine that with the 1888 story of Mary Whitmer, which comes from grandson John C. Whitmer, that his grandmother always called the angel brother Nephi. And when you add all that up, I end up with, again, the apologist can go, it's a mistake, and it just so happens to be copied over and over and over and over and over. And Mary Whitmer's just disillusioned, she's deluded. For me, it's like, I think the early leaders, members, narrative, creators of the church seem to think that this is Nephi. And as you point out, there's no real history of calling him Moroni. It seems like everybody had the early narrative that this angel's name was Nephi.
It's a strange thing, in spite of the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. But yeah, this is also very much, it seems very in flux. I think that is an objective truth, that the name of the angel is in flux.
At the very least, as everybody keeps calling him Nephi everywhere, nobody goes like, hey, that's not right. Somebody, we need to fix that, change it, talk about it, correct it. It just slides by without anybody even noticing.
You were going to say something, Kolby?
Well, I was going to say it's times like these that I do take comfort in the idea that the God that Mormons believe in is not a God of confusion. That's one thing I definitely take peace in. No, we were talking about this briefly while we were paused. It's a strange thing to have to believe in a God that would allow for that mistake, even if it was just an original mistake, right? It's so odd for me when you're dealing with apologetics to believe in a version of God that allows that mistake to be propagated for literally for decades across multiple different sources, leading to people being confused about what the true narrative is. And at the same time, believe that God can reveal to Joseph Smith the specific details of how many shares someone is entitled to for contributions to the Nauvoo house, right? Or to square it with even like the scriptures that prompted Joseph Smith's visit to the grove, supposedly, according to the 1838 account, that if you ask God, he can reveal things to you. Even Moroni 10:5 says, by the power of the Holy Ghost, you may know the truth of all things. Randy hit on this when we were talking about the word all in the 1838 First Vision account, but all means all. And I guess I'm just always struck by one of the things that apologists need to believe in is this idea that the Holy Ghost, or through the idea of some idea of revelation, that you can understand truth in a different way than we do secularly, right? That something can be revealed to you in a way that you know beyond the way that secular people can know. Do we see that reflected as we've looked at these different documents? In my view, the answer is a very clear no. Instead, what we see is the normal amalgamation of additional details. They always seem to build in miraculousness as the versions of the stories get revised and added to over time. And to me, it's a very human effort, and it seems so apparent when you look at it all together in detail, like we have our FM. I'm so glad we had the chance to do a deep dive on this and kind of have more of a live conversation. We've been looking up additional data points as we've kind of gone through all of these sources, and I think it just shows to me the very human element of the way this church evolved and changed over time. And at least as I'm looking at it as like hypothesis testing, when I look at all these issues, it's very clear to me that there's a human element involved here, and I would say not anything divine, actually divine. So,
well, taking it from Joseph Smith's point of view and assuming that he's making this up, okay, and he's got to come up with somebody who is the person who gives him the plates or shows him where they're buried or whatever. He's got a couple of options. First off, it doesn't have to be anybody in the Book of Mormon. It could just be a generic guardian of the treasure. And I think that's maybe what it is initially. But then it comes to the idea, it's somebody in the Book of Mormon. We're going to tether it, like you had said, to another person for authority. And it could be any character in the Book of Mormon. It wouldn't have to be a character in the book. It could be Zelph, right? It could be somebody else showing up, or Onan Dangus.
Yeah, I'd prefer Onan Dangus, mostly for the jokes. Yeah,
he's one of my favorites. He's big at parties, that guy. So it could be, but if you're going to limit it to a character in the Book of Mormon, then two obvious names suggest themselves. One is the last Nephite, and the other is the first Nephite. So it could either be Moroni or Nephi, and I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of back and forth along the way until they finally decide, no, we're going to go with Moroni. Bill?
There's a problem with having it be Nephi, which is Nephi was never anticipated to be used from the start, other than God had a foreknowledge that Lehi's pages would be lost. In other words, if Lehi's pages aren't lost, they do turn up later. Nephi is sort of only there as a backup plan. So it would make more sense for Moroni, who obviously is the last author and buries the plates that Joseph Smith gets. He, in a treasure guardian culture, Moroni is the treasure guardian of the plates. He's the one who buries them in the hole, and it's his job to protect them till they come back again. So shifting it from Nephi to Moroni makes more sense for both of those reasons.
On the question of linking it directly to the world of the Book of Mormon, one of the things that's interesting to me is that if Joseph Smith had stuck with his original narrative, which is it's just a nondescript, unnamed angel, rather than tying it directly to whether it's Nephi or Moroni, a character directly in the Book of Mormon, we're seeing moves because the arguments against Book of Mormon historicity are so strong. We are seeing moves for the church to say that the Book of Mormon, a lot like they've done for the Book of Abraham, or at least I'll say, we're seeing moves on the part of some apologists and some leaders in the church to basically say that the Book of Mormon could have also been like a revelation, like the catalyst theory of the Book of Abraham. And one of the things I always point out is you really can't believe that because of Joseph Smith linking the account of getting the plates so directly to these historical characters. So if he had left it, ironically, if he had left it at the original nondescript angel, the church could make that pivot a lot easier than it can now, when if you divorce from the historicity, you're stuck with this issue of like, so wait a second, Joseph Smith didn't know who he was actually talking to or what they were actually giving him. he's confused about the entire process, but what comes out the other end of this process is scripture that you can take to the bank. It's just that believing that level of contradiction and that web to me makes absolutely no sense. So ironically, if he'd left it the way it originally was, the church would be better phased to pivot, but they can't because he tied it so directly to the historicity.
Good point. Yeah, the details. It's in the details because details are given. I mean, look at all the details. The angel was a little bit taller than most people nowadays. I mean, come on, the guy's floating off the floor. But and perfectly white, no seam. All these details, which are designed to give verisimilitude to the experience. The problem, though, is that on the one hand, they give verisimilitude to the experience, but there also where people get caught.
Right.
Is by coming up with all these details and then later forgetting about them and contradicting them. Now, I want to give everybody a chance to give your closing thoughts about this. And let's start with Randy, and then we'll go to Bill, Kolby, and I'll finish out. Randy, what do you think?
Well, I think it's just been a great time, certainly learning from all your insights. And I think this is genius. I think it's little bits and pieces I've heard before, but I think to bring it all together is really a valuable contribution to the whole post-Mormon situation. I think these are insurmountable problems for the church apologists if they really try and engage with what we've talked about. I don't think they will. I think they'll do their thing. And then kind of broadening my final comment to just a bigger picture, anybody that knows me well knows that I'm into classic rock of the 70s. And I was listening to Ted Nugent last night with some of his diatribes. And I'm going to paraphrase Ted Nugent, which I don't know has ever been done on your podcast before, RFM. But to paraphrase, great people refuse to turn a blind eye to indecent and criminal behavior. And that's what we're talking about here. Joseph Smith's behavior, I'm sorry, I think some of you are more charitable than I am, but I come down really hard, and I know you do too, in terms of the polygamy, the treatment of women, lying to your own wife about it. This is just, not only is it indecent, it's illegal. And to continue, if you're not a whistleblower, and I consider all three of you whistleblowers, you're a liability. If you're not blowing the whistle on indecent, criminal, dangerous, abusive power, you are encouraging it. So my final comment is kudos to all of you, because I know you work very hard on this research. I try and do my little part, but thanks for including me.
Thank you for being here, Randy. That goes to you, Bill, I think next.
Yeah. So anytime I'm diving into Mormon history, and especially if I'm learning new things, I'm having the time of my life. And today was full of that. I mean, again, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but the faithful scholar who says that this is an anachronism. That was new to me. I had never come across that before. And most of the other stuff I had seen here or there kind of as an isolated data point. But for us to have this conversation today, lay it all out collectively and make what I think is a compelling argument. There are compelling reasons to doubt, as a wise man once said. And I'll just note, after watching all of this, we've made, I think, a compelling argument for why one should doubt the Moroni story and the first vision, to the extent where I'll put this up one more time. Last Wednesday, we shared Leonard Arrington, who said, because of my introduction to the concept of symbolism as a means of expressing religious truth, I was never preoccupied with the question of historicity of the first vision. And I think I'm on the same bandwagon. I also am not preoccupied with the question of historicity, because I can sense that there isn't any historicity with the first vision. So I'm no longer preoccupied with it. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me on as well, RFM. I really enjoyed diving into this history, which is one of the loves of my life. So
I'm glad that you had that experience and you enunciated it so articulately, because that's the same feeling I've had going through all this stuff, is learning all this stuff and finally being able to really see stuff. It's exciting to me. Kolby, you're next, and then I'll send us all home.
Yeah, I'll just kind of echo the sentiments Randy and Bill have shared and say, I think anytime we look really carefully at the seams of Mormon history, meaning like how versions of these stories change over time. Here we've done it with Moroni, and we've talked a little bit about the First Vision accounts because this was a follow-on of your guys' episode on Wednesday. I think that is where we get the most interesting insights into the way that Joseph Smith ran this movement. And I think we've asked a lot of interesting questions already in today's episode. We've answered a lot too, but I think there are some interesting threads to pull at that we've hit in real time as we've looked at some of these details. Why would Joseph Smith do this? Why would it evolve this way? It's such an interesting journey to look at Mormon history this way. And so thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Well, thank you for being here, as well as all three of you. And everybody who's watching, thank you for being here. Don't forget to donate. I do want to tell you one thing, though. I'm really, really happy with the way this turned out. And I hope everybody else is really thrilled by it, too, because I was really concerned. This started as a very small thing on Wednesday night with a few slides that I had done with thoughts that had occurred to me when Bill Reel's talking about the first vision, but they're about Moroni, so they're kind of tangential anyway. And we went long, we didn't get to them. I thought, we'll just do this. I'll do this separate. And then I started researching it on Thursday, and I thought it would be an hour to transfer the slides over to something else, and we'll all have a nice time. No, it was like 5-6 hours, and I wasn't done. And I thought I had an hour left. So I come in Friday. That hour becomes 5 or 6 hours until finally we have the presentation that we have today. And then I was, because I'd already invited you, and all three of you had already been kind enough to accept. And I'm going, what have I gotten myself into? I've got 84 slides. There is so much here to talk about. 4 guys are great to talk about something that is not this complicated, right? Because then we add all of our talk and our insights and our thoughts and our experiences. But this is something that was going to be much bigger than I had anticipated, especially with your help. I'm so glad that all three of you were here because of your insights and your participation. This is much better than it would have been without you. So I want to thank you for that. Okay, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. That's about all for tonight. Join us next time, will you? Because until next time, this is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.